Under the chaos, a frightened, trembling man shouted, "Wait, what do you want?" In front of him was a young man with gray hair who looked at him coldly. He continued to persistently beg, "I will do everything I can." His eyes became sharp when he heard that, then he replied in a cold voice, "Your head." He finished without hesitation and dropped his hand. The fire continued to burn. Standing in front of that desolate scene, was a figure of a young man with gray hair. He looked thoughtfully at everything that was being swallowed up by the flames. Then he put his hand into his shirt. From it take out a tin. He held a cigarette in his hand, looking at it in a low voice. Then quietly tossed it into the fire that was burning in front of him. When he finished, he turned and left the place, leaving everything behind him. He walked calmly. Then the scene suddenly changed, and a boy with white hair was breathing hard. As he ran to a forest, he gradually slowed down. Then tiredly leaning against a nearby tree caught his breath. Breathing he whined, "Gosh, that's tired, they should have sent reinforcements when I finished my work here and reported back." This person was Signature Jagger. He said, he didn't want to fight something like that, but as soon as he finished he felt a killing aura. Seeing this, he hurriedly stood up, dodging to the side. Then looked back. The huge tree he had leaned on just now had been felled with ease. He scolded silently, "Damn it." It was followed by a silhouette of a large creature approaching. It was a burly green monster, with bloodshot eyes and sharp teeth. As soon as it saw him, it rushed frantically in that direction. Seeing the monster in front of him was unbelievable and reproachful. This thing was a wild animal. He thought, and the owl just now must have come from that disgusting aura, the out-of-control actions. It must have been one of those damn magic swords. A purple aura of unknown origin was emanating from the holy sword in the monster's hand. The monster on this side was still looking angrily at him. He just thought, "It's coming." Then the monster also swung the sword in his hand, frantically rushing to where he was standing. He also quickly dodged back. Seeing this, he did not give up, but swung his sword again, slashing towards him, but he was still able to dodge that sword path of it. After a while passed, the trees around him had all been cut down by the monster. He thought to himself, he was trying to show off that it was really a ghost sword. The monster didn't stop, it continued to swing its sword and slash wildly. He didn't give in either, but quickly dodged each of its sword paths. Ever since, he had been right beneath one of the logs slashed by the monster. Not seeing the sentence, it also looked up for him. The boy up here calmly and seriously drew his sword, and looked at it. When he finished, he plunged straight down in front of the monster's bloodshot eyes. Use all your strength to slash it once. His gaze now had also become more fierce. But in his eyes, the monster was cut like that by him, but its head had not been cut off from its neck. Seeing this, he thought to himself, "I slashed a little shallow." Then the monster's wounds slowly healed, and it glanced at him. Even though he tried his best, he still couldn't kill it. He was annoyed. This wasn't worth it. That old man, when he comes back, I'll ask twice as much money. After the wound had fully healed, the monster once again swung its sword and slashed at him. But this time he no longer dodged, but instead clutched the sword in his hand, looking straight at the monster. Just like that, both swords collided with each other, creating a powerful aura. The surrounding soil and rock also cracked accordingly. His sword constantly frictioned with the monster's sword, which also gradually showed cracks in it. He was still determined to hold out with all his might. But then his sword was still cut in two by the monster. Without hesitation, he circled behind the monster, causing it to turn its head to look. His eyes were filled with murder looking at it. Then followed by a slash. When he was done, it was already dark, and the monster was also dealt with by him. He sat thinking tiredly at a nearby tree, feeling like he was going to die. His sword was almost broken. Now what was left was, suddenly out of nowhere came a voice, "Coming here. Come to me." Hearing this voice your eyes gradually widened, in your heart you whispered scolding, "Damn it, the sword is." The voice coming from the sword on this side continues to seduce, "I will give it to you. The power can destroy anything. I will help you release all your resentments, so come to me." His feet followed the same voice and gradually walked over. Even though his body lost control, he kept reminding himself in his heart, "No, stop, please, if I lift my sword, my fate will be like the orc lying there." Hell, I couldn't control myself. Then he was lured in front of it by the sword. His hand also unconsciously stretched out, he thought in his heart, "No." When he pulled out his sword, it followed it and said with a laugh, destroying all resentment of everything. But then suddenly both the sword and he were dumbfounded, not understanding what was going on. Seeing that you are not controlled by me, the sword hurriedly said, wait a minute. Listen to me, hurry up. Without giving him another chance, he swung the sword in his hand, seeing that he said in fear, hey, stop. But then he threw it away, falling straight into the river right there. When he finished, he yawned and left. The sword just like that gradually sank into the water. On this side, after throwing the sword away, he just helplessly sighed a breath. Then remembering the image of the old man of my family will be mad and scold. What, an orc carrying a ghost sword? Bring the evidence here. How dare you fool me? Thinking of this, you put on a disgusted expression and said, that damn old man, how could it be that cheap? He walked and lamented, this money was not even enough to buy a sword. Suddenly a small dark-haired girl stood right in front of him. He just dodged to the side, wondering in his heart, what is this, a stray child? Seeing him go on, she grabbed his hand and held him back. She scolded, out of words, you dare to throw your master away, you are crazy. He looked at her incomprehensibly and thought, who is this baby, and his mouth is helplessly laughing. I think you are looking for the wrong person. Here I went, said, and he swung away. She gritted her teeth angrily and said, this guy. Then with all your strength you shouted, are you going to appear clueless after caressing the body of such a queen? Hearing her scream, he was so frightened that his face turned and he turned around and asked loudly, she was talking nonsense. Then the image of everyone around him huddled together and talking, caressing, such a little girl, popped into his mind. Thinking of this, he blackened his face and asked her, hey, why did you do this to me? You didn't fit in and scolded me. The queen wanted to say that. How dare you throw me into the lake without thinking? Hearing these words of hers, he was so serious that the string worm, the lake, the throw, could not. Thinking about it, he looked at her and said sweatingly, so she was that. Seeing that he recognized her, she said happily, yes, I am the magic sword you threw away. A little introduction, Minerva, is a sword that increases hatred in the heart of the user. The magic sword equals hatred. It will give the user a tremendous strength and resilience. The player will go crazy with the hatred that is constantly increasing. She replied, yes, it was the ghost sword you threw away. Then she continued seriously, being a servant without knowing her fate. Serving her master. Before she finished her sentence, she realized when he had disappeared. Jagger on this side after escaping from there let out a breath. It was hard to escape from her, but also entangled. It wasn't long before she walked up to his side and stuck her head out and asked, who are you going to leave behind? He turned to look at her and stammered and asked, miss, this street is a dead end. How can you be here? She asked him calmly. She asked because she didn't know the truth, and then she said, my queen is a demon sword. Where are you? Well, as long as I want, I can go there. It seems that you do not believe me. It is okay, because you are the one who holds me. You are my servant. Hearing you say that wherever you are scared and trembling, speechless. Then he hurriedly spoke up to stop her. Wait, what the hell have you said so far? I'm a servant. Hearing him ask, she also asked honestly, you don't know the truth so you asked. From the moment you take this queen, isn't it obvious that you will become a servant? Unable to accept the truth in front of him, he turned his head and walked away and said, I must have warmed my head. Seeing him walk away when she called out loudly, this dick, you go somewhere. He didn't care about her and waved away people, including her, hurry home, stop chattering. Unable to bear this indifferent nature of his, she said angrily, you behaved so rudely just now. Feeling the aura behind you, you also had to turn your head and look. She said, Minerva is my queen's name. Saying that, she summoned a sword and said, now admire it, my true form. Seeing that she was indeed a sword, he immediately became excited. Seeing this, she laughed and said, hurry up and kneel down and pay your respects to me. And he silently stretched out his hand towards her. And then grabbed her hand and dragged her away and said, come here. She found herself being dragged so hard by him and said angrily, wait, don't be so harsh on me. Listen to me, servant. Changing scenes, an old man's voice sounded, so, the name said would never come back. He heard him ask, he was just happy and laughing. Then he said, I'm here to handle the magic sword, making Minerva on the side jerk. The old man heard this and asked, really, ghost sword? He explained with a grin, because it was here, and then he just pushed his neck in front of him. Just like that, everyone fell into silence. Then he gave you a judgmental look of disdain. Seeing this, he hurriedly said, wait a minute, let me explain. then he told the whole process, including narrating what Minerva had said to him. Suddenly a sobbing sounded, causing both of them to turn their heads to look. In front of them now was a weak Minerva, sobbing at him, "You are too much. No matter how much you bother me, I should not sell you." The boy on this side saw this, and hurriedly said, "No, hey, don't do it anymore, it's useless." She continued to sob, "Brother, don't yell at me." And the old man's face is as black as a pot ass when he sees this one. Then he yelled angrily at him, "This shit, get out of here." Then he was anxious to leave. He sat in front of the door and scratched his head in exasperation because he was considered trash. Minerva on this side was angry. "How dare you sell me? Just wait another 1,000 years. He didn't bother to ask, "Why are you treating me like this?" Hearing his question, she said happily, "How many times have I told you? Ever since you took my queen, our destinies have been intertwined until the day you leave this world." He could only watch helplessly now as he watched the sky sigh, scolding, "Damn." At this time, there was a carriage moving steadily. He was annoyed and bit down on the candy. Sitting inside the carriage, he whispered, "I really don't want to go into the city." Because of her, he couldn't take up the task from the village council anymore, thinking, and then he looked over at Minerva who was looking out for the view. He said to her, "Hey, I ask you this. You say you're a ghost sword. How can you turn into a human?" She thought quietly, then casually said, "I don't know, I was born to do it. I am also curious. How can you escape my control even if you have held hands with this queen?" He responded exactly as she had said, "I don't know, naturally." So they both fell into confusion and thought. Suddenly the carriage stopped. The coachman also turned and said to you, "Warrior, we have arrived." So they both dismounted. The coachman said happily, "Thank you for being with me, warrior." You on this side also bent over and thanked. "Thank you for giving me a ride." Then the driver pulled out a business card and said, "If you're interested in an escort mission, stop by." Then he smiled and said that see you next time, and then just left. Seeing that he was still in his bowed position, she stood beside him angrily saying, "Bastard, your head is about to touch the ground. Why don't you do this to your lady?" He gloomily replied, "What, annoying, what?" He didn't care anymore and waved his hand and said, "If you don't like it, go alone." See him go on and on. She hurriedly said, "Hey, stop, you're going to run away again." In Cade Province's largest city, Epilum, Minerva happily looked around and exclaimed, "People have developed a lot of smears too." Hearing this, he looked down on her and said, "She looked like a newcomer down the mountain. Don't look around, just go down the mountain. Stop being quiet." He said, "We're here." She asked, "Is this the place to go? You're not going to sell this queen again, are you?" You panicked. "You're crazy. What are you talking about? You're not that stupid." He didn't say a word but just looked at the door in front of him silently. Seeing that, she asked, "You are so worried, what plans do you have?" Then he opened the door and went in. Seeing someone come in, the staff in it spoke up and invited in. "You said, I want to take on a mission. Let me check your identity first, show me your ID." Then he handed the girl his ID. She got it and said happily, "Yes, Signature Jagger." Then she asked in a loud voice, "Signature Jagger, the deadly warrior." Hearing this name, everyone in it gasped in surprise and looked at him. Hearing this, he could only cover his face, and Minerva on this side laughed when he heard his nickname. He said gloomily, "Just give me the task list." "Oh yes, here it is." Everyone around him kept talking. He was really a dead warrior. What happened? I haven't seen him in a long time. He still focused and read the list and said, "I'll take this." Seeing what you were going to choose, the girl was awkward. "But this, you don't care, it's okay, just get it for me." Hearing this, she also said, "This is a letter of recommendation." Just like that, after receiving the mission, he immediately turned to leave. Everyone around him still couldn't believe his eyes and said, "The Death Warrior is already a terrible name, the Death Warrior. One of the 5 great warriors." When he came outside, he blackened his face and said, "This is why I don't want to go to the city." Minerva on this side couldn't help but laugh and said, "Dead warrior, stop laughing." Then she couldn't help but laugh. In a forest, a voice said, "It's disappointing." Minerva walked beside Jagger and said, "I didn't expect your mission to be just that. You don't have any courage, dead warrior." He said disgustedly, "I told you not to call me that anymore." She still refused to stop but continued to tease him. "Sure, death warrior." He didn't bother to say anymore but just scolded back, "Damn." 10 minutes ago, a lady who was sitting in a formal chair said to him, "Thank you very much for coming. I was very nervous because the mission has been posted for quite some time without receiving any news back." He asked, "What's wrong?" and Minerva is running around happily. She replied nervously, "Yes, now I just have to leave it to you." "Don't worry, I'll find it anyway." Suddenly I saw something, Minerva cried out. In front of her was a portrait of a girl who looked quite like his wife along with a cat, he said, his wife's cat. The end of running around was Minerva getting a lump on his head, and he lamented, not knowing what the nobles of the day thought. "I can't believe they shut down an entire park because of a cat." Minerva heard this, and took the opportunity to sneer, unbelievable that a warrior was looking for a cat. Hearing that, he was mad. So he shouted, "Shut up, it's all on you. You can't help but say again, why are you blaming me? You said, why did you damage my sword? If I didn't have a weapon, what kind of mission would I do? What do you mean without a sword? Don't you have this queen? Think about it, if you pick me up." He listened intently. "Then won't you become the strongest?" He thought to himself, yes, if everything was what she said. Then he thought of the prospect of holding a sword in one hand and a red flag in the other, standing in the middle of a sea of corpses. Then his hand suddenly moved. Then he raised it and snapped at her forehead. He turned and walked ahead to leave her behind. As he walked he said, "It's only children who act like that." As soon as she snapped her forehead, she was crying warmly, it hurt. Then she shouted loudly, the scar in the middle of her face, the candy addict, the deadly warrior. Walking for a while he stood back and said, "Strange. Although this park is closed, it is strange to be so quiet." Even the bird's call disappeared. From somewhere the image of the beast along with two large long fangs. He continued, "There are magical beasts ruling this place. I don't even have a sword nowhere." Just as a beast appeared out of nowhere raising its clutches towards him. Then it plunged down making a loud noise, and the ground around it cracked. Following the smoke, a figure hurriedly passed by. He successfully dragged Minerva away from the beast. Then he looked at the beast in front of him and muttered, "As a sword-fanged tiger." Then he remembered the mission sheet and kept wondering why a cat quest was rated A grade. Unexpectedly, they would call a sword-fanged tiger Sesame, as he said as he looked at the nameplate on the tiger's neck. Minerva next to her asked, "You, warrior, it looks like we're in danger." Seeing her still, he quickly stood up and released her, causing her to smash her face to the ground. She said, "Hey bastard, are you going to keep doing this?" You don't care that she's scolding and grabbing a nearby branch and saying, "Back off. Don't loiter lately and get hurt. You didn't know that the tiger was rushing towards you." Seeing that, Minerva said loudly, "That's the problem, behind you." As soon as she finished, she looked at him in surprise. Before her eyes, Jagger was easy to handle. With one blow, he knocked it backwards. Seeing this, she muttered, "Unbelievable. With just one branch." The big guy said as she looked at the image of him repeatedly hitting the tiger. After only a moment, the tiger was lying trembling on the ground. She could only helplessly look at him slowly approaching. Seeing that it was still forced to stand up, he thought, strangely, the sword-fanged tiger was an intelligent creature, so it should have noticed as soon as it sniffed the difference in the strength of the two. But he kept fighting even though he knew it was because, saying that, he threw the branch away and looked in its direction. The little paws are slowly coming. Seeing his little ones walking up to his mother, he said, of course, he had children. Seeing him walking, the tiger was also wary and looked at him. Ignoring him growling at him, he told him, "Calm down, I have no intention of harming you, I came for the Marquis to take care of you." A loud call rang out, "Sig!" He exclaimed happily, "I understand why it's called a kitten." He said, he was too heavy, but the tiger ignored it and continued to lick his face and meow. When she returned, the Marquis scolded angrily, "This trouble," so that the tiger could only weep and meow. She said, "You worry me, the tiger on this side can only respond warmly." After scolding, she stroked it too and looked at him with a smile, thanking him for completing the task. The Death Warrior, hearing her call this name, he immediately raised his head and looked at her. Minerva was on top of him and vented his anger. He gently used his hand to grab her head and replied, "I already know, though I went specifically to my hometown to hide my identity." She heard this and said with a smile, "Such a name is hard to forget. But what is the relationship between the two of you?" Hearing her question, they both replied in unison, "Stranger, my servant." Hearing the other say that, the two angrily questioned each other. Who did she call the servant? What, the stranger, the servant's name? Seeing the two of them like that, she said, "It seems like this is quite a special relationship." Then he turned to ask, "By the way, lady, why did you give him the name Kitten?" She replied, "When I first met this child, I really thought he was a cat. Now to me he is still a cute cat, but others probably don't think so. Maybe he ran away from home for that reason, maybe he thinks he doesn't belong here. So I wanted to use this opportunity to tell you that I wanted to take this child back to his original home, and when he heard that, he looked at her in surprise. He said, if you're talking about the abode of the sword-fanged tiger, yes, that's where you're thinking. In the easternmost region, a majestic snowy mountain now appears, she said, Sigmir. At Epilum, passers-by were all looking at Jagger gossiping, heaven look. He looked to the side and thought. So cumbersome, walking next to him was Minerva with the kitten and her 3 small children. Everyone around was excited. So cute, can you kidnap? Minerva heard the words without hesitation but thought to herself, the inferior people. They could not take their eyes off my beauty. Seeing that she had this illusion of acute stage power. The kitten walking next to her also had to look at her without words. Jagger walking ahead couldn't help but turned his head to look at her and said, You're lucky, what do you mean? Wishing she could be like her, her head thinking nothing. This word was like a knife stabbed to her heart that made her blood boil. Even though she was angry, she tried patiently to ask, By the way, where you were going? You said to go to simmer something, he replied. I have to stop by a place. Kitten over here is constantly looking around. Hearing him say he had to stop by a place, she asked, For what? He nonchalantly replied, Am I going to buy a sword? Just as he was about to move on, his shirt was grabbed by Minerva. He turned his head to ask her, What's wrong? She blackened her face angrily and said grimly, That. Then she screamed in frustration, You fart, damn Sig. Inside the arms shop, a man with his hair swept back said warmly, Welcome to the best weapons shop in the Aphylum sect, do you need my help? Minerva looked around and assessed all the rubbish, and he just said, I want to buy a sword, as good as possible. The man looked at the person in front of him and whispered appraisal in his heart, looking back and forth. He didn't look like the one who had bought a famous sword. He was now standing next to Minerva and asked how angry she was going to be. Thinking about it, he told you, or you just go and see it. Our equipment is very good, there is no installment policy. He went on to add, We only accept cash. Seeing this attitude of his, you replied uncomfortably, Then go see, I have to decide whether to buy it or not. Hearing you say that, he said, Yes, invite you naturally. Then he followed him, the kitten standing behind him growling and looking at him. Minerva at his side saw the kid as if he wanted to devour people alive. Then she walked over to him and said softly, That guy was weird, no matter how fierce the human sword was. Not letting her finish, he rubbed her head and said, She was still stronger. Hearing her compliment, she blushed and raised her voice, Don't do that. Then everyone followed the man. Walking in front of a gate that was being opened, he turned his head to look at him and introduced. This place was a high-end equipment counter. Then they followed him inside. As he walked he said, If you are looking for a sword to hunt monsters is not the usual type. This sword was the perfect choice, he said, and he brought a sword in front of him. Seeing the carefully polished sword in front of him, he asked, This is, he introduced, its name is Chained Dragon. If it's a chained dragon, yes, it's the legendary hero's sword. Arinus Gunfield, who single-handedly destroyed countless dragons. The red color of the blade is made from the spine of the dragon chain, and its characteristic is its soft curves. Speaking of this, he shuddered and complimented, So beautiful. Seeing this, he only ran out of words and asked, What is the price? Thinking in his heart, in fact, this is the largest weapons store on the continent. He said the price was, when he heard the price he said he blackened his face in surprise. Then you said, Show me something else. He saw you like that, he said, You know right away, it's a joke, although he thinks so, but he still smiles out of his mouth, so next is the white sword of the Nabaran master blacksmith. He was a little excited, but until he continued, if only, he was immediately silent. Then he continued, Yes, but he didn't notice it, as if realizing it he looked over. He asked, What is this? Heard you ask, and he replied, You see. This is a new item the store has just received. The sword discovered by one of the 5 warriors, Karl, has not yet been displayed, so we have not given it a name or price. Hearing this, he hurried to the sword, and seeing this, he said, Gentlemen, you must not touch the display. But when he saw his murderous gaze, he was frightened and shouted. Then he went over and touched the sword. Around them, a blue aura of power surrounded them both. Seeing this, he gave a cheerful smile, then said, I will buy this sword. In the slums, in a rental hostel, filled with discontent, Minerva's disgruntled voice said, I don't like it. Why should I sleep here? You on this side, holding the sword I just bought, and answered, I spent all the money to buy it. If you don't like it, go out and sleep. It still sleeps soundly, you hear that? loudly say again. You tricked me into buying another sword is not enough. You even make me in this shabby place. He didn't bother to turn around and lie down on the bed and waved his hand and said, What else do you want me to do? I'm sleeping. The angrier she called, the traitorous warrior, he said on one side, Order, this is a ghetto. Night comes. Despite screaming earlier, Minerva is now fast asleep like death on the kitten's back. Suddenly he heard a noise. He was lying on the bed and opened his eyes awake, wondering in his heart what was it. There was a noise. Thinking about it, he sat up. Look out the door. He just walked out of the room. Then follow the noise that is coming. When he reached the attic, he looked out the window and asked, Is she? Take refuge in the moonlight outdoors. In front of him was the image of a girl with blue hair, surrounded by ice. He called, Hey, I don't know what's wrong. But crying doesn't solve the problem. Hearing a voice, the girl slowly turned her face. He asked, she wasn't going to die, but when he saw the girl's tear-soaked face, he asked startled, Why did you? She interrupted him, Everyone who was with me was dead. Even honest people, brave people. I don't want to be with anyone anymore, but... Seeing her eyes and the stone on his shirt, he asked, Wait, could she be? She replied, My name is Sui. I am the cursed sword bound to you. A few introductions. Sui are, the sword marbles overpower the frost, the sword swirls into the user's pity, and causes them to take their own lives. Frost builds up on the blade, like tears. Hear her speak. Then he concluded, So in a nutshell. You are the sword I bought in Nephilim, and I will end up like your former owners. It was suicide after a while wielding a star sword. Sui tearfully replied, Yes. Hearing this, he scolded silently, Damn. Hearing him say that she was scared because she thought he was scolding her. Then she cried and let out a tirade. I apologized. I was determined that I would never make a contract with anyone again. But some mysterious force prompted me to do it to him. Seeing her so frightened, he reassured, Calm down. Then he patted her head and said, I don't know how my contract with you existed, but... Assuring her was, I'm not going to die and I'm not going to die for you, and she looked at him in surprise. Then remembering the previous image, the previous owner's call sounded, Sui, then you will meet that person too. A partner I was willing to risk my life for. Seeing this image of him, she immediately remembered that girl. Then she said, Let me ask. What's his name? He replied, My name is Sig, signature Jagger. Hearing his name, she gave her a big smile. She said, Yes, Mr. Sing. Suddenly Minerva's voice suddenly sounded. It was too cold in the room to go outside to warm. I didn't expect to meet a stranger I never knew. Seeing Minerva, Sui said in fear, I'm Sui. Then she turned to ask Minerva who was staring at her, asking what she was doing. Minerva didn't hesitate but the voice approached Sui's ear and said, I've heard everything downstairs now, you're a demon sword. Hearing her ask that, Sui could only hesitate in fear. Minerva went on to say, You will pay the price, for daring to steal my subordinates. Suddenly Jagger's hand from behind her is slowly reaching out. Then he pressed her head down and said, Pay what, little one? She was angry and turned to yell at him, You are really free to live. You already have a demon sword. It's me. You don't pay attention to your anger and say, Calmly listen to me. But you are a sister, so you should pose as a sister. Hearing this, she looked up and asked, Sister. Then she was like a cat and turned to look at Sui. Sui saw her looking at him and hurriedly said, Please, please help me. Sister Minerva, who heard it called her, immediately lit up her eyes. She said, calling another sister, another hour. Sui hesitated to obey. Sister Minerva, again, sister. Just like that, the two of them went on one again, one calling her until the morning. Minerva on this side was happy to expose, and Sui was tired of breathing. Seeing that it was resolved, he asked, Is it done? So now I go. Hearing you ask, Minerva asked in a loud voice, Where are you going again? You called, Sui. Yes, Sir Sig. Then she turned into a sword. Then he took the sword in his hand and his face darkened and replied, Minerva, go buy a sword. At the arms store, Jagger forcefully kicked down the door and entered. Seeing this action of yours, the sword seller hurriedly asked, What do you mean by that? He nonchalantly shook his hand and said, Ask what else to ask. Ask the shopkeeper to come out here and talk. The other guy spoke up, This guy is crazy. He continued, Knowing is sparse, not knowing is based on the column. You, let him know what civility is, lighten your hand, and after saying that a blonde twice as big as you walked up in front of you. He patted your head contemptuously, Here, get out while I was still talking properly. Without letting him say the second sentence, he immediately hit him in the face. Knocked him backwards. He blackened his face angrily and said, "This guy really doesn't understand human language. I want to see the shopkeeper, not the guard." Seeing this one, the purple-haired man who clawed back also had to be apprehensive. He went over and pointed his sword at his neck. "Ask, now, yes or no." He still stiffened his throat and said again, If you do that, I'll be scared. Do you know who your father is?" Suddenly a man's shout stopped. Enough. Hearing the noise, they both looked out the door. Argos was walking in with 2 soldiers following him, and when he saw him coming, the purple-haired man called, "Father." He didn't bother to ask, what was wrong. He smiled and said, "Nothing, father, please go back." Without letting him finish, he cut him off. "I didn't ask you, it seemed." Then he looked at you and said, "There's something wrong with you." Hearing that, you just tilted your head and asked, "Are you the owner of the shop?" He replied, "Yes. First of all, please tell me why you stormed here angrily. It better be a good reason, otherwise, you'll pay the price. You don't go around saying, for a simple reason, my name is Signature Jagger, the apocalyptic warrior alias." Saying that, he immediately stabbed his sword directly into the floor, causing ice to appear everywhere. Then he continued, his first weapon shop, which was the best weapon shop in the world, sold demon swords to a warrior. That reason was good enough. If I can't control the demon sword, the calamity has already struck this land, then what will happen to the first weapon shop that sold the demon sword to me? Hearing you say that, the son of Argos nearby is not willing to say, lie, it was Kar's mouth that said. Without bothering with him, he drew his sword and said, "Of course, I don't want to make a big deal out of it, so I'll accept the compensation." Seeing you walking towards me, he was frightened, but still said, "Dad, hurry up." You said, "I'm going to take one of his arms," and you swung your sword at him. The sword kept rushing towards him, thought he had gone to worship his grandparents. But when he opened his eyes, he saw the sword being placed close to his father's neck. He was scared and said it out loud, "It's my fault. I'm his father but I can't teach him, so please let me compensate you on my son's behalf." Hearing this, he just let out a sigh and collected his sword. He exclaimed, it was true that fatherhood was as warm as his temples, moved to tears, so let's go. Then just like that, he was allowed to take the dragon chain and leave. After he left, Argos just stood looking at his stupid son. He saw him like that and said in fear, "Dad, I just want to help." But before he could finish speaking, he caught his hateful gaze. He said, uselessly, and then just turned and walked away. He was told that by his father and scolded, "Damn it." Then he called angrily, "Signature Jagger." On the other side, after leaving with the dragon in his hand, Sui at his side called out, "Sig, let me ask. What, were you really going to cut off that person's hand at that time?" He heard this and asked in bewilderment, "I wasn't that crazy, chopping off his hand for nothing, so in the first place. His purpose was that sword," he asked, and she pointed to the chain in his hand. He raised the sword in his hand and looked at her and said, "2 for 1. Ready to teach someone as bad as him a lesson." "Why did," he said, "that's my motto in life." Then he remembered a blue-haired man who continued, "Double the grace, 10 times the resentment." Minerva on this side was lying at home sleeping and said, "You sig bastard, when will you be back?" A little introduction. The Dragon Slayer, the legendary Dragon Slayer. Legend has it that the Dragon Slayer Arena's Greenfield once used this sword to protect the holy kingdom of Carbon from greedy dragons. The people there considered it as a national treasure. At Rose Church, Minerva was talking looking at the Jagger all the time wistfully. With an angry expression, "Who looked at you thought you had met your soulmate?" He replied with a cheerful smile holding the sword in his lap. This was an ordinary sword unlike hers. Who doesn't know, it could be another magic sword. She was really jealous. 500 years has it done later, whatever, jealousy. Sui called out to him. There was anger on his face and he said, "You are so petty, just now you noticed that kid." He replied that no, he just wanted to make sure the sword wasn't a problem, and she replied telling him not to make excuses. She said shyly again before. It wasn't that he was so passionate about cuddling with her. He was a little stunned. There was chatter in the background. What did I just hear? Passionate cuddling. Then threatening that if she didn't stop he would scold her, she looked away unwillingly saying this time it was Mr. Sig's fault. He rubbed his head, smiling in acknowledgement and asking for her forgiveness. She blushed and said she would only forgive this time. Suddenly someone called out to him, "Jagger." Suddenly a man appeared greeting him. and introduced himself as Mark Blentier, who would cooperate with him on this mission to escort the merchant, shaking hands with him and continuing to be honored to work with Dune's warrior. He smiled in reply and thought it must have been because the guild had leaked the news. He then complimented, "The Warriors Guild is unique." Then proceeding to greet Sui and Minerva and saying they would go to Amelia together. Minerva replied in an unhappy manner, "Not to talk to me, slutty human." The man's expression was a little surprised. And when she looked up, there was suddenly an admiring expression on her face. In the carriage, Minerva is saying that the human world is not too peaceful, boring, he is not sure, just that the fighting style of humans and demons is different. He suddenly reminded in a cold voice. She asked in surprise what was wrong. She sat on her side immediately. She hid behind her in fear and said to protect herself. Down here he was assassinated by this warrior. Getting off the horse was also when it was dark. He apologized for bothering Mark, to which Mark replied that it was okay for him to get used to it anyway. Mark went on to say that she was a child, just as lovely as his daughter, and had just learned to say that he already found it cute. Even though she called her mother first and not her father, didn't they say it felt very similar to fatherhood? When she called me, my heart was purified. He smiled wryly. Well, wouldn't it be better to leave her like that? Well, I don't, you'll know later. The bald man continued. Well, the warrior doesn't have to meet like this, is destiny. Saying that, I held a bottle of wine in my hand. Then he said, isn't it predestined to meet like that, or why make a drink together? This is honey wine only sold in the Holy Carbon Kingdom. It is said that even if you drink this wine caught by a dragon, you will survive. He refused, it was precious wine, but only, he poured the wine into a glass and begged, don't refuse me. He reluctantly took it. The wine was already there, what else? Mark said he needed another drinking group, but hearing stories from warriors was enough. He began to tell stories. In the year he had just turned 15. While pursuing his path to becoming a warrior, his father died and those who adopted him unconditionally. Then his father died and those who adopted him unconditionally, but it was not until later that he found out. These men were mere greyhound seekers who would capture warrior descendants and sell them to Parthenon marks. Mark Blentier asked in surprise how he got out of there. He was about to continue. Then Minerva went to ask what the two of them were talking about. That was too funny to look at it. Then she asked what he was holding that smelled sweet. Oh, what is this? You want to try? Of course, you dare not. But then she came out cheerfully. How come you finally accepted the position of servant? You told me to withdraw it. She happily hugged the glass of wine. I had become the KKK queen. Hey, kids aren't allowed to drink, but you're still obstinate. He turned to continue talking to Mark. That day he escaped because a mercenary had saved him and taught him a lot. After drinking, she laughed, haha. The first thing is double gratitude, 10 times resentment. The second is that people who smile at us should never believe them. After drinking the glass of wine, Minerva also fell. He quickly picked it up. He turned to look at him with cold eyes. Never believe them, do you see right, brother Mark? Hearing this, he clenched his fist on the sword. L line. Very quickly he was able to get better. He brandished his sword and asked him what word he knew. He laughed and replied that he had to ask. He continued to slash. He also swung one sword in response. Then gently laid her down. His accomplices appeared to attack him, capturing him. He replied that of course he knew from the beginning. She lay on the ground exasperated and said I would take revenge. The battle began to take place. He used his sword to destroy them one by one. Sui ran out, not knowing what was going on, anxiously asked. He told her to get Minerva out of here. But here it is very dangerous, she wants to stay help. He refused and continued fighting, saying this war would end soon. The guys who beat the council heard that, laughed at the sassy bastard who said it was an early end. His gaze was cold. Well, I didn't say anything wrong, and asking who hired you is against the law. It didn't matter what he was angry about. He didn't care to coldly swing his sword and slash, it didn't matter. The others who saw this also rushed in with swords, this dead dog. He used his sword to support him. The fight continues. These two men were slashed by him. But he also seems to have succumbed. Suddenly something flashed. He raised his eyes to look. As a skinhead, he rushed towards him from above. His gaze was fierce, and he was about to swing his sword and slash. He glared at him. His stormy attack was landing right above his head. As soon as it touched the ground, terrible energy was emitted. Then a huge explosion occurred. Dust and dust dissipated. His sword dug deep into the ground. He was hit quite hard, leaving a scratch on his face. He thought in his mind, what a crazy attack. His vision was not clear. Before he could finish, there was a sword slash that made him black in the face. But he very quickly dodged. His sword collided with the other's swords again. Another big explosion occurred. She gave me a disdainful smile and told me, luckily you had suspected us in the first place, but if you were just that, it would be disappointing. Apocalyptic warrior, you're still on the defensive, ready to fight. At this point he used Jagger's vision. My other accomplice slashed, what can you do? The two swords collided sharply with each other again. He used the attack of Mo Gong's jaw. His sword line was like a snake coiling onto the other's sword. Then like a storm squeezed him. His movements were extremely definitive. He was rushing to try the others. His gaze was extremely steady. Sweet sword directly fed this guy boxed rice. He was sword to sword with another guy. Seeing this, he said, if you still hide your job, then it is really not unreal. Then he swung his sword intending to slash. Then you will pay for this farce, and a sword like a storm slashes. On this side he was still fighting another. He finally discovered his sword path. Destruction of Jagger's vision. He slashed a sword, causing the surrounding rock to crumble. He gently walked forward step by step, at his feet were glowing circles. His footsteps grew more and more powerful. He moved faster, face to face with Trok's attack. The gap is now very small. Another collision. An earthquake explosion occurred. Astonished. The front is full of smoke and dust. He rushed out of the smoke, his face much more scratched. He clenched his teeth angrily, you bastard, you use your own hands to sustain the blow. His rail was injured and was bleeding incessantly. His gaze narrowed. He gently slashed his sword in half, causing him to bleed. He reached out to take his sword. He had fallen on the ground. He held his sword towards him and said coldly, then, wait, Kevin Argoran is the one you need to know. You coldly told me that as soon as we left Epilum, they immediately hired assassins. Most recently only that place had a grudge against us. In the first place, he should hide himself more closely. His face blackened, his eyes were cold, bald, and said no. But after that he did not complain anymore. He was directly fed a box of rice by him. He turned coldly and walked away. Sui ran to him nervously. He comforted that it was okay. She asked if the reason he didn't use her was because she was a magic sword. He didn't trust her. He looked at her with affectionate eyes. He said he hoped no one would be killed by her. So I hope you don't worry. After saying that, he collapsed. When he woke up he was in bed. At a place he didn't know. He sat up. And he wondered who brought him here and even treated him. A voice suddenly spoke up telling him to still act recklessly. He asked him. The second prince of Emilia's kingdom, Pia's Emilia, asked if he hadn't seen the apocalyptic warrior for a long time. 5 years ago, in the royal castle of Newtemen. A hand slammed down on the table violently. The Grand Prince of Emilia, Tadras Emilia, was furious. The Duke of Parthenon had been assassinated. Suddenly Tadras Emilia sat up and shouted orders, bring the assassin, signature Jagger here and execute him immediately. Hearing that Pia's Emilia said, he is not only an assassin but also a warrior. Tadras glanced angrily. Fias remained calm. Arsene Parthenon had committed all sorts of sins and barbaric acts over the years. Fias laughingly explained, who inherited the blood of a warrior, had made the villain pay for his own sins, so he should thank him. Another nobleman spoke, saying that was not true. Duke Parthenon was the highest noble of Emilia. How could one kill that day? Fias interrupted with a laugh. Well, he didn't know what he was talking about. Fias's eyes looked cold. You should think of who would be blamed for the Parthenon's evil actions. Fias finished speaking and turned to ask, right, brother, which made Tadras extremely angry. Fias, your bastard is only the son of a concubine, you don't know. Fias ignored his brother and declared, I will give signature Jagger a name as a warrior. Fias sat casually in the room. Jagger looked at Fias wonderingly, why he was here, and where was this? Fias smirked, I have something to ask you, and this is Emilia's border, is that enough to satisfy you? Fias snapped his fingers gesturing. The door slowly ajar. Minerva, CO, Roche came out. Fias continued, I came looking for you while they were treating you. I brought both ladies with you here. Sipping Fias' tea said, those two ladies are quite healthy, you take them with you and take good care of them. Jagger replied wistfully, it's all because someone forced me to adopt the name of the 5 great warriors. The scene of Jagger fighting 2 others appeared. Jagger continued, now I have to live in a village in the countryside, because idiots keep approaching me to break rocks. Instead of living such a life, living with these people is even more comfortable. Roche named Jagger, signature a Jagger. Then told Jagger to tell the prince to come in carefully. Minerva said, "You too, human." Co hugged Minerva, sister. Roche took up his sword and glanced angrily, "You guys." Fiaz put down his cup of tea and said, "Roche, enough." Fiaz stood up and asked, didn't he believe anything? "Then leave, gratitude will be rewarded doubly." He turned his head and smiled at Jagger, and he would have to pay it back tenfold. He glanced along. "First, let's just say you're indebted to me," Jagger replied. "Why go around like that? Just say you want to use me." Hearing this, Fiaz said to Jagger, "I want to ask you to go on a mission." Fiaz said, "Now that our faction is being assassinated." Jagger wondered about it. Didn't that happen often? Fiaz admitted, "Yes, but if that were the case, I wouldn't have brought it up to say." Then, Fiaz went on to say, "It was strange. My brother's side was in a similar situation." Jagger asked, "So, you want me to arrest the perpetrator?" Faye admitted with a smile, "Yes, at all costs, it matters." Faye held out his hand mysteriously and said, "Those who hold the power of this country are afraid of him. Those who rule corruption will be punished by the Punisher. He is not only a warrior of this country, but also a symbol, signature Jagger. Therefore, if I introduce that you are on my side, I will attract a very large number of factions. Will you join me, or be punished?" Fiaz said with a laugh, if he could solve the assassination, so much the better. "I'll give you a month." After saying that, Fiaz smiled and walked to the door. Then suddenly turned his head again and with a wink and smile said to Jagger, "Go to the holy city of Newtemin, that is my request." Jagger sighed wearily. Things were getting more and more troublesome. An air of anger was directed towards Jagger. It was Minerva radiating anger. She raised her hand and smiled. It all ended well. Jagger hesitated. "No, that." Minerva interrupted. "Now it's time to talk about the other side of this story." After saying that, Minerva angrily rushed towards Jagger and her beasts. Jagger said in a panic, "Wait, no one was hurt." Her round fist lightly punched Jagger's head. Jagger looked up. Minerva told Jagger, "It's not a problem, if you're my servant, don't get hurt without my permission." Jagger was surprised by what Minerva said. "Minerva, she miss me." Jagger just finished speaking. Minerva's face darkened with anger when she heard Jagger speak. Minerva shouted angrily, "I can't take it anymore. It's time for you to be punished." Jagger was startled. "Ah, don't bite me." Co interrupted the two of them, "Mr. Jagger," she said seriously, "this time I agree with her. I don't want anyone to get hurt or killed because of me." But tears rolled down her cheeks. "I didn't want to see him hurt." Jagger was touched by what she said, "So promise me, that no matter what happens, you must use me." Jagger smiled softly, "Yes. I promise." On the carriage that was going, Fiaz sat laughing in the car. Roche called to him, "Prince." Hearing the call, Fiaz replied, Roche is worried. "I'm sorry to be rude, but isn't he too weak to be a big hero?" Fiaz answers Roche's question, "Of course. The Punisher is a political tool, but think about it." Fiaz held a letter with a smiling expression and continued, "He survived safely even after killing the most powerful duke. Perhaps, I didn't use him for power, but going back earlier," Fiaz read the contents of the paper with a complicated expression. "It says Duke Partheno must die today, so contact the enemy nobles. He may have used me for revenge in the first place." Fiaz questioned Roche, "Mr. Roche, do you defiantly achieve your goal even if you risk your life like him, honestly?" Fiaz put his hand to his smiley face mysteriously. "I look forward to next month too." Kingdom of Amelia, capital of New Temian. The girl looked at the huge castle in front of her in amazement. This level of development, to humans, is quite impressive. This castle has never fallen, even when demon kings or dragons are furious. Jagger said, "This castle has never fallen, even if the demon king or the dragons are furious. The stronghold has no lost artifacts, no historical records, so it is considered a unique stronghold." Stop gasping in amazement like the countryman. "Let's go quickly." They went into the city. The inside of the city was extremely busy. There were so many people, I felt like I was going to get lost. She saw that too. Now that it had turned out like this, she sighed helplessly. Then a flick of a hand. With a mischievous wink, half wiped out is just as beautiful. Both the big cat and the girl were grabbed by a hand, causing them to panic. He glared angrily, whispering out of his voice. The girl replied, Okay, I'll restrain myself." The girl saw that someone was selling prostitution, running fast, scrambling to sell shoes here, and pointed in that direction to ask for him. Sig bought me that treasure, he said coldly. No. You pointed to another booth. Come buy any medicine you can solve. Buy me that. Avoid me being paralyzed like last time, I said no. It was obvious that the annoying girl was mixed with a little sulk. He turned to look at the thought in her mind again. Then he thought of Sui Dang. Turning to see the little girl standing staring intently at something. He went over to ask her what she wanted to buy, and Sui looked up at him startled and replied, yes no. He immediately asked how much is this? The shopkeeper quickly replied, very beautiful, isn't it? Very suitable for your sister. I will sell it cheaply. You decided to buy it and other items. He looked at Sui tenderly and handed her the hairpin. Sui sheepishly accepted it and said thank you. As for Minerva, he rudely threw it at her, startling her. Minerva asked if you gave me this, and he asked why you didn't like it. Minerva sheepishly gathered her hairpin and said no, no, not. Minerva quickly clamped it up. Blushing cheeks she said one day this treasure would save lives, he said enough. Then he mused, this place, New Timian, is a historical treasure that has never lost anything. Perhaps it will be possible to find a way to destroy the contract with the demon sword here. The two girls now pulled her hair up to Minerva and hugged Sui and said happily, we look like sisters like this. Sui replied wryly, hee hee. If I could find a way, would I be able to destroy it, like cutting knife tape? Fiaz saw them again and was glad to see the ladies again. Minerva coldly said the Prince of Humanity wasn't interested, and Sui replied oh hello. I'm here, but what to do now he asked, and Fiaz replied, nothing. He only needs to perform the duties of a royal investigator. I don't have the skills to do things like that, I know. I said, I'm just borrowing your reputation. I want to start the campaign right away, but that looks a bit. I wonder what's wrong. Fiaz says I have to dress you properly. Amelia's terror. The apocalyptic warrior must actually be Gate. He was also a little interested and said I was looking forward to it. Fiaz turned to Minerva and said this lady had bad eyes. Jagger now clenched his teeth, then transformed into an apocalyptic warrior. Then there is the scene of a party. Voice said Piaz hadn't arrived yet. Yes, the prince he knew no rules about, Tadras. The person who just asked was the king of the kingdom of Amelia. Winston Amelia, he continued coldly, even if he was an enemy, it was despicable for him to demean his brother. The new one is the one who has deprived me of all the foundations I have built, that. The eldest son angrily clenched his teeth. If it were not for him. Then the eldest son considered ego more important than ability. Lai's eldest daughter, who was just addicted to fun, left the palace because it was too boring. Even if we conquer the whole world, there will be no one to entrust it to, the king thought sadly. At this moment the servant announced, the second prince of the great kingdom of Amelia. Piaz Amelia arrived, along with a smile and a wink. The eldest son sitting on high saw this and angrily shouted at Piaz, how dare you come later than your father, you are crazy. Piaz scratched his head apologetically. Sending guests to arrive should be late. The monarch heard this, and Piaz quickly introduced. The brother was furious. Jagger walked in. Someone at this party recognized him, who once executed the evil Duke Parthenon. Why did he? Don't tell me. Piaz went on to introduce him, the apocalyptic warrior, signature Jagger, who had now changed into a new outfit that looked imposing in accordance with his cold temperament. The brother who saw this angrily called out to the soldiers, catch that noble slaughter immediately. The soldiers immediately surrounded Jagger but he remained cool. He said, stepping back, removing Duke Parthenon was a righteous act. Then he pulled out his sword. His whole body was enveloped in murder. He continued coldly, I don't feel humiliated to act for the sake of righteousness. His gaze was cold, causing the soldiers to squeeze too. He gently brushed past each of them. Fast and decisive movements. He was faced with the last name. He reached out and grabbed his neck tightly, making him squirm. He lifted him up, his whole body trembling. He said, signature Jagger. See the son of the kingdom of Amelia, Winston Amelia. The monarch laughed, much to the surprise of his eldest brother, oh father. Then the king laughed too. His gaze sharpened, it wasn't by chance that he had only assassinated Parthenon. Then he ordered the soldiers to retire. It is agreed that he took the life of a worm nobleman who had stained national prestige. The will of the one is no different from mine. The eldest brother who heard this angrily clenched his teeth. Piaz smiled contentedly, Duke Parthenon, who supported the Grand Prince with the same power as the monarch. But this fact should not be ignored. The head of the kingdom, the monarch still wanted to continue the party, From beginning to end there was only one person. The banquet of Newtemen, which takes place once every 2 months. Everyone was laughing and talking outside, but what I saw was just. Jagger stood alone at a view of the people around him, silently exclamating this peaceful falsehood. What he sees here is a silent battle for power between the nobles. At this moment there was a hand on Jagger's shoulder. It turned out that this was the 2 princes of Pias. He cheered, congratulated, your elite launch party seems to have been successful. Jagger is indifferent, I am not sure. He narrowed his long eyes, looking at everyone in front of him, looking at him with fearful eyes. He whined, what kind of country is treating me? Pias laughed, because of the rumors about him, condemning these corrupt nobles for capturing this crying child. Jagger also ran out of words, looking to know who spread those false rumors. Pias said, so your achievements are surprising. The area has been very quiet for a few years, but now what? Pias tapped him on the shoulder and said, by the way, from now on you are the beginning. Next time dress up to be more impressive, wouldn't that attract the nobles to the stars? Pias left, raising his hand to say goodbye. Looking in the direction Pias left, Jagger thought, it looks like no one cares who dies. Suddenly a voice from behind comes, sorry. He turned to look, and she saw Jagger's terrifying expression and hiccuped. She was trembling, tears in her eyes, Jagger helpless as to what to do. He sighed and said, don't worry, I'm not catching you. Hearing that she immediately became vivacious, asked him, really? Then turned to his friends, hey guys, it's okay. The people who saw this excitedly rushed to him, laughed and cheered, asked him very innocent questions. This flesh and blood dead warrior is a warrior. I am very obedient. I am still very clean teeth. Do you really turn into a bat in the evening? Jagger was now helpless about how to answer the children. Minerva suddenly appeared to speak. Oh well. Jagger and the children turned to look at her. She was full of confidence, boasting to the children, this servant of mine is so hard. Hearing her say that, the children immediately ran around, wondering. She was telling the truth. Minerva crossed her arms pride and affirmed, of course. He is your servant, so you know him better than anyone. The children thought it was true to ask you, so if you do something evil, they will take your head. Minerva replied, of course, just a small mistake keeps you up all night. Jagger suddenly appeared behind Minerva at this moment, raising his fist threateningly. This was the moment. Minerva only now realized. Minerva screamed, ran away the boys, and then the whole group ran into smoke. The children now ran and said, you are being sentenced. Jagger sighed, honestly those kids didn't understand anything. He went to the balcony outside. Jagger went outside to watch the moonlight. Relax and lament, it's tired. Suddenly there was now a girl's voice, more tired than catching monsters. A beautiful blonde looked at him with a smile. It turns out that this is Princess Lorite Emilia of the Kingdom of Emilia. He hurriedly bowed to the ceremony. Hello princess, I am Jagger. Princess Lorite Emilia approached and said, you don't have to be so polite, dead warrior. I just left because I felt claustrophobic. Then she turned and walked away, saying to him, the moon rises beautifully. Why do people keep sticking to such boring things? Jagger didn't understand what she was saying and asked, what was he saying? The princess leaned over and leaned against him and in a flirtatious tone, you know. Try punishing me tonight. She made a seductive gesture, shyly saying wouldn't it be more fun to do so? Jagger darkened his face and said it was rumored that she slept with all the men in Newtemen. She was famous by a Tangneo name of Emilia but princess. The person walked charmingly, but his gaze was quite cold. The princess almost revealed her nature. Her cold gaze became clearer. She walked past him angrily and said, you've heated me up. You're here to pursue power after all, aren't you? She leans her hand on the railing and asks. Just like those who are gathering here. Jagger asked her again. It seemed that the princess didn't like this place very much. The princess did not answer, but wanted to ask him again, the Death Warrior, how a woman without 2 platform power inherited. Arriving at a place like this again, she turned to look at him. Jagger told her thoughts, if you don't like it, leaving is one way. Or who could have stayed here forever? The princess looked in his direction. He turned his head to ask her, didn't he, princess? The princess laughed bitterly, if so, that's good. It's interesting to talk to you. I hope the next time we talk is in bed, warrior. Having said that, the princess left. Jagger stood thoughtfully. It's the Tangneo of the star Emilia. Later in Jagger's room, Minerva was being instructed by Jagger for daring to appear outside. He pressed his fingertips on her head, causing her to scream in pain. What is this nonsense? My head, my head. Jagger questioned, didn't I tell you not to show up? I said you did one thing. Minerva shouted at you not to help me. He saw Sui in the back talking sadly. Sig was having an affair with another woman. Jagger said helplessly, Sui, why are you like that again? The two princes on one side laughed and said, sorry for finding it funny. Jagger asked Piaz what was wrong with the prince, and Piaz said, do you know Albert Frederick? Jagger replied, I know, Albert Frederick Knight. How could a swordsman not know one of the 5 great warriors? If the title is bestowed on warriors who have achieved great achievements in their youth as 5 great warriors, then the other name refers to knights possessing unparalleled power on the continent. Prince Piaz mused, that Frederick fellow, challenged him to a duel. Hearing this, Jagger's face was filled with surprise. Everybody. Then he panicked and told everyone to get out. He was going to run away as soon as he could. Prince Piaz told him to wait a minute. Jagger hurriedly said, I'm going to die. Wait for what? Prince Piaz explained to him, although it was a duel, he seemed to have something to ask of his own. By the way, do you know a man named Sigmund Frederick? Jagger suddenly changed his countenance. Minerva on one side asked, should we run away? Then Jagger spun in the air. A collision between the two occurred. The battle was over, and the stands were silent. Jagger is jumping out after kicking Albert the Knight against the wall. The audience began to cheer with delight. Jagger rolled around again and landed safely. I hate the kids, the 3 of you sit by the fire. Prince Piaz picked up the meat skewer and said too noisily. Roche agrees who likes them, the weaklings just waste food. The blonde said oh, I like children, especially if they come from the Zhang warrior clan. Is that right? Signature Jagger. The blonde smiled pointing at the Jagger Sig which had a short lifespan so it was sure to have a good price. Piaz approached where Sig was lying on the ground. Glad your body was so expensive, Sig. He sat down in front of Sig and smiled and thanked the man who had been born, Sig. Sig on the ground cried out, Piaz reached over to remove Sig's gag and asked, do you have anything to say? Suddenly Sig rushed to attack Piaz with his head, taking him by surprise. Piaz was butted to the point of bleeding from his mouth and cried out. And Sig ran away. Unfortunately, Sig was thwarted by Roche. Suddenly Sig is blocked by Roche. He has Jagger blood in him, don't forget, because he is so violent that we have to pretend to be a monster to be able to trap. Roche looked at Sig lying on the ground saying don't neglect, we don't know what the hell he's going to do. Suddenly a voice said, I will kill all of you, surprising Roche. It turned out to be Sig. He got up and looked straight at Roche and said one day I'm going to kill you guys. Sig rises. Make Roche seriously face how you are going to kill us. Roche squeezes his nose. Roche is angry just because we treat us so gently that you dare to be complacent. The blonde laughed at the cowardly rat like there was nothing you could do but roll your eyes. Roche pressed Sig's head to the ground. What the fuck did you do? Someone speaks up, I think he can do things better than the devils. Voice rang out, causing Roche to look around in surprise. From the sky suddenly a man in black flew over. He blew Roche away, causing him to step back. Roche shouted, what the fuck? The other asks me back. He introduced himself to the stray dogs of Pathenal, which I had been following them for days. He raised his sword and smiled and said I was Sigmund Proud. Well, it's quite hard following you, I have a request. He pointed at Jagger to give me that kid, and I'll gladly kill him for you. Then he smiled and suggested it or not. Before he could finish speaking, the axe came from nowhere. Thankfully Proud dodged. He exclaimed, this answer was a little scary. Roche just threw an angry axe at such a squad of hounds, you foolish. Proud sucked on the lollipop and laughed. Okay. The answer was determined. Saying that, the two sides rushed into a fight. Proud cast a spell that left the other 3 unable to see anything. Damn, I can't see anything, Grace. Grace hurried. I was chanting the mantra. Wait a minute. While Jeremy was whining that the cowardly bastard couldn't see anything, Proud came forward and swung his sword at him. When Grace finished chanting the mantra, she could see the scene. The two shouted Jeremy. Proud coldly remarked that for a hound, you are a little lame. Roche shouted I would kill you. Grace, support me. Grace behind understood. Saying that, Roche charged at Proud violently and angrily. Proud glared at him and said I couldn't calm down anymore. Roche despise. Roche turned and tried to attack Proud, the dog, but he bleed his head. Proud hurry. Punched him hard in the head, causing him to fall to the ground lying unconscious. Proud put his sword on his shoulder and finished. Suddenly Grace cast a spell from afar, causing the place where Proud exploded to be engulfed in flames. She frantically walked over to where Proud was dead. Suddenly Proud's voice sneered at him, it was dangerous. He complimented what a turmeric look. Proud pointed towards the fire calling out Benjamin. She turned around in amazement. Grace ran away in a panic. She ran to Jagger's side. Put a knife to your neck threatening not to come close. I'll kill it if you move. Let go of your sword and kneel. Proud calmly let go of his sword. Do not wait for the sword to touch the ground. Proud takes a shot, causing the sword to stab hard into Grace's body, causing her to fall. Proud exhaled and asked Jagger if it was okay, kid. Having found a way to escape death, picking up the knife and untying it, Jagger was silent. Jagger touched my shoulder even worse. Proud laughed at this kid being so fastidious. Proud rubbed Jagger's head. Let me reintroduce, I am Sigmund, a mercenary. Jagger also replied that I was Sig. Signature Jagger, thanks for saving me. Proud grinned and turned away. Nothing. You can repay me twice as much. Jagger heard that, not believing his ears. Double. Proud picked up his sword and said that was my maxim. Proud turns away again. I will double repay, and 10 times more vengeance. The ending, Shadow, a black sword radiating darkness. The ninth of the white sword chain crafted by Master Felt Nabaran, was originally a set with the knight shield. A year later, while Jagger and Sigmund Frederick roasted the meat, Frederick held up the skewers to look at it and exclaimed, the same skin I hadn't expected, but now you can call yourself a chef. Jagger rubbed Kay's cheek shyly. Not to that extent, Frederick said. Don't you feel ashamed of yourself? He looked at Jagger, who was eating delicious meat, and smiled, thinking the initial precaution had been greatly reduced. Now it felt equal to him. What a good thing. Seeing Frederick eating candy, Jagger frowned and exclaimed, are you eating candy again? Your teeth are about to run away from home. Frederick soaked the candy and shook his head. I'm quitting smoking. Cheer people up a little. Jagger explained it's not good to eat a lot of sweets. Frederick is surprised. What a strange kid, he doesn't like sweets. Jagger argues I'm not a child. Frederick refuses to take it for granted. At a certain restaurant, put the beer mug down on the table. Frederick exclaimed to Wah, it's this taste. Sig, would you like to try it? Sig, curious, yes. What's that? Frederick replied, a restaurant. Frederick introduces, no need to eat with dangerous knives anymore. You take care of the cooking part and I will take care of the handsome part. See what? Jagger refuses me, not to that level. Frederick is too modest, that's a problem. Shouldn't a man be more assertive? Frederick said, crazy. Jagger still wonders what Frederick just said. Why do you like that? Frederick stood up and slammed the newspaper down on the table. The Cadrigo clan had been destroyed. One of the warrior clans, the Cadrigo clan, that's where I was entrusted with the task of finding Sig. A clan having discovered the plot of the Parthenon, prepared to report it to the king. Scenes of the city burning in flames appearing with gore and killing. It is said that they have been accused of unprovoked charges and face genocide. Suddenly Frederick turned to go. Sig, let's go. Jagger wondered, why? Frederick said the dogs at the Parthenon seem to have sniffed something. If we were still here, we could die without anyone knowing. Frederick and Jagger ran through the woods with their belongings. Frederick commented although he didn't like it very much, but now he had no choice but to go back. Jagger in the back did not understand where to go back. Frederick watched Jagger smile. The safest place on the continent. Suddenly a sword flew towards the two. Frederick quickly picked it up. Frederick was worried they had caught up. The hounds of the Parthenon, a bunch of masked men dressed in black wielding swords, looked extremely fierce. Frederick called Sig, which startled him. Yes. Frederick reassured Sig, don't worry, these guys aren't a problem. I'll clean them up, so stick to them. Then Frederick with his sword rushed to attack the men. The two sides slashed each other fiercely. This side Sig fought equally hard. Frederick anxiously exclaimed Sig. Suddenly in the sky several black-robed men with swords rushed towards Frederick. But thankfully he managed to avoid it and stood beside Sig. Frederick picked up his sword and laughed. Sig, it's time to go to class and pay attention. Sig behind Frederick doesn't understand. What? Suddenly the two men in black rushed towards Frederick, who smirked in Sig's surprise. When the two swords were about to reach him, Frederick pressed himself against a tree and spoke. When faced with a group of enemies, use the terrain to your advantage. Frederick swung his sword and slashed at the black-robed men, causing them to bleed and gore, crying out bitterly. Standing opposite the men in black, Frederick put his sword on his shoulder. What? Not about to fight, now afraid of me brandishing my sword. Frederick the sword goad on the ground with that little liver, it was a bunch of hounds. Frederick swung his sword and slashed hard. Make the blackshirts masked monkey. Frederick slashes a coward who fears death is a coward. But Frederick looked at the black-robed hounds of Parthenon. That's it. In another place, suddenly the man asked, so where is that child now? It turns out to be Albert Frederick, Knight of the Five Kingdoms. The warrior of doom hesitantly replied, dead. Albert Frederick angrily crushed into a stone bench. He sighed. Standing up and walking in front of the doom warrior surprised him. That child is Sigmund Frederick, my only child. He looked at the warrior of doom who was still kneeling. He tried to return to the clan to gather strength against the Parthenon. Approaching the warrior of doom, he commanded, say, warrior of doom, why is my son dead? Don't you want to answer? The warrior of doom bowed his face, very sorry, sir. But the warrior of doom raised his face to look at Albert. I will show you the life of Sig who was by my side. However, there are some conditions. Albert Frederick's eyes darkened. His face flushed. I hope there is no transaction involving my son's life as a bargain, warrior of doom. An arena with many spectators in the stands, laughter and laughter filled the arena. Girl turned to the side and said to the man, no matter how hard they tried, they wouldn't compare to Sir Albert. Everyone around was also excited. He is a warrior of destruction. I bet Sir Albert will win today. Let's see who wins. Above is the seat of brothers Fias Amelia and Tadras Amelia. Tadras Amelia said, you seemed so calm. Fias Amelia replied with a smiling face that there was nothing to grimace on such a beautiful day, brother. Tadras Amelia said with an angry look on his face. There was an orderly voice, and both Fias Amelia and Tadras Amelia turned to look. It was King Amelia walking forward with his two guards. Ah, father, invite you, father. King Amelia slowly sat in his chair. King Amelia opened his eyes and looked ahead. King Amelia looked at the chair with the flower lying on it. It seems that Laurel did not come today. There is a reply that we have not appeared in public for a long time. Should you call her father? King Amelia waved his hand. No need. King Amelia looked into the arena where the referee in red, Jagger and someone else were standing on it. The referee said out loud, Amelia is the pride of our country. The referee introduced Sir Albert Frederick and the one most stoned for what he had done to the Duke. Signature Jagger. The referee went on to invite him into the arena. Jagger and Albert enter the arena together. Jagger and Albert the horsemen watched each other in the middle of the arena in the bright red sunset. Suddenly the knight Albert turned to face King Amelia. The stands were full of wonders. What's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong? King Amelia was looking towards Albert the knight. Horseman Albert slowly removed his hat. The knight Albert put his hand on the ground to meet the king. I am Albert Frederick. I have something to say to you, your majesty. King Amelia raised his hand and said, Albert said it was a shame that you had to fight someone of lower rank. The knight Albert went on to say, so to be fair, please punish the god. King Amelia asked again what the penalty was. Knight Albert said seriously, if Jagger's sword touched me, I would take it as if he had won and would make any request, and I hope you could be a witness. Tadras Amelia said out loud, what the hell are you babbling? King Amelia is resting her head on her hands and pondering. King Amelia spoke to Tadras, a call that startled Tadras. King Amelia pointed to her forehead and said that the person who was talking to Sir Albert was not me, and Tadras quickly replied apologetically. King Amelia accepts the offer of the knight Albert. I will do as you please. The knight Albert replied to you, your majesty, in the stands full of delight from the audience. Albert the knight said to Jagger, who was still watching, was it satisfactory to him? Jagger nodded and said exactly what I meant. The knight Albert put his hat back on with the blazing woods, so stop chatting, fight with all he has. Jagger replied of course, and on condition that he keep his word. Albert the knight drew his shimmering colorful sword. Jagger also drew his ghost sword tied behind his back. Then Jagger let out a sigh. Jagger was fully prepared, with two of Jagger's precious swords in both hands. What happened the other day? Jagger said to Sui, so it's Sui, this time I want to borrow your powers. Sui was playing with cats and turned to look. Jagger scratched his face with his finger, or was it a bit too much? Sui replied loudly. Sui is full of joy. Well, of course I'll lend it to Mr. Sig. Jagger replied thank you, Sui. Sui said to Jagger excitedly, if you want, go ahead. Minerva was holding a cat and looking at their conversation. Minerva shyly held the black cat in her arms. Jagger held his ice sword in his hand. Okay, thank you very much, Sui. Jagger held the sword back. Around the sword were sharp pieces of ice. Icy gases around Jagger. Jagger clenched his teeth, swinging his sword forward sharply. Jagger slashed the sword forward, with the sword spell creating a perilous stretch of ice to the knight Albert. Albert raised his shield to block Jagger's attack. Then the knight Albert slashed the ice with his sword. Jagger rushed as fast as the wind approaching the horseman Albert. Jagger wields his red sword preparing to slash Albert. Jagger swung his sword hard at Albert, creating a red light. The knight quickly took his sword and slashed a blow in Jagger's direction to counter Jagger's attack, then Albert jumped backwards. Jagger wielded his ice sword in preparation for his next attack. Jagger slashed his sword hard at Albert, and Albert quickly used his crab shield to block the attack. The red-eyed Jagger wielded a red sword and slashed another blow towards the Albert knight. Jagger's two attacks blended together to form a beautiful reddish-blue light, but with a power that could not be underestimated. The knight Albert was still using his shield to fend off those attacks after. Jagger sighed as Jagger was fully prepared. In both hands were two precious Jagger swords. Horseman Albert fended off the attack with all his might. Taking advantage of that opportunity, Jagger flew over, brandishing his sword, preparing to attack the knight Albert. Albert the knight swung his sword at the oncoming Jagger. Jagger seemed to sense the danger he was about to encounter. Jagger quickly flew behind the knight Albert to strike, then quickly drew his red sword. Jagger swung his sword in a state that was still flying in the air. Albert the knight turned to look at Jagger with blue eyes. Okay. Albert the knight raised his shield to block Jagger's attack. Jagger didn't expect it. Albert's action surprised Jagger. Albert the knight swung a sword at Jagger. Jagger flies a long way from Albert's horseman, then collided with the ground. Jagger was lying on the ground with his body covered in injuries. Horseman Albert after that attack said but. The knight Albert had a murderous look in his eyes, just like that. In the stands full of cheers and delights of the audience, making the whole arena very exciting, Albert Knight still stands standing in the arena. Meanwhile Jagger was lying on the ground, his face pained. There was a silhouette that appeared covering half of his head, it was damaging. Minerva took her umbrella, hands on her hips standing in front of where Jagger was lying and looked down. It's not too late, accept this body. Minerva with a strange charisma extended her hand to Jagger. If you want, I will even cut the god for you. Jagger looked up at Minerva and pondered. Suddenly Jagger sat up to Minerva's surprise. Jagger turned to point his finger upwards. No need, now I'm hitting this. Minerva shouted this angrily. Sig. Jagger resolutely continued with his fight. Minerva says evil name. Minerva continued shyly. This body is also a source of that power. Jagger walked towards Albert Horseman. The Albert Knight spoke up. That's enough. Jagger spat blood out of his mouth. Jagger picked up his ice sword and said Sool. The ice sword gradually formed in Jagger's hand, I said, and then I will show you the whole life of Sig. Jagger held the sword in his hand with a determined expression. Sool. Jagger suddenly plunged his ice sword into the ground. An ice vortex appeared right on the arena floor. Its ice welding chi was also terrifying to cover every corner of the arena, the fog of ice crystals. Albert Horseman thought limiting star vision. Then Albert the Knight focused his gaze ahead. Albert the Knight raised his shield and sword in preparation to counter Jagger's ice attack. Horseman Albert swung his sword and slashed away the ice fragments. On the reflection from the shattered piece of ice, Albert the Knight is preparing to face Jagger's next attack. Jagger slashed a blow of his sword, and the knight Albert held out his shield. The Albert Knight looked at the sword that had just slashed at his shield. This was. Albert Horseman wondered, signature Jagger's sword. The knight Albert stood there thinking, obstructing the view, rushing from all sides, and striking the front swinging his sword perpendicularly. Jagger was now right behind him and brandishing his ice sword in preparation for attack. Horseman Albert stood there and said, adjusting tactics intelligently, not a bad idea, seemed to have noticed Jagger behind him. The knight Albert slammed his shield into the ground forming a great power. That power worries Jagger. Albert's shield creates an extremely chaotic power, shattering everything around him. This power has caused everyone to be in chaos, the surrounding soil and stones have shattered, and the dust and sand have thickened the arena. Albert Horseman laughed triumphantly, ha. One of them also had to vomit blood. Jagger holds an ice sword that is plunged into the ground to balance his wounded body after Albert's attack. Jagger's fighting style is to replenish the missing mana level with the sword. There was a voice, aren't you running out of mana? Stop. Jagger replied no. Jagger stood firm with determination, not yet. Jagger with a close look prepared to launch an attack. I still haven't done it. Jagger unleashes Jagger's eye, surrounded by currents that surround Jagger. The ground beneath Jagger's feet was shattered, exploding. Jagger used his power to rush like lightning to the knight Albert. Albert in a state covered in colorful power. Horseman Albert wields his sword thrust forward. Jagger with his cold gaze was still approaching the Albert knight. Blood had appeared after Albert's attack, blood splattered at Jagger. Albert the knight stared in amazement at Jagger. Jagger held his opponent's blade in one hand. Blood was splashing from Jagger's hand, Jagger holding onto his sword in the other. Jagger swung his sword across the neck of the knight Albert. Albert's hat flew out of the air after the slash. Jagger was still holding his sword close to Albert's neck. Albert had revealed his face after the slash. Jagger suddenly let go of his sword. Albert the knight wondered if he was letting go of his sword. No, rather. The sword after touching the ground completely froze where it touched. Albert the knight looked down at his feet, where sharp pieces of ice were growing, star ice. The knight Albert thought, could it be that all the attacks just now, which were aimed at freezing, were? Jagger jumped off the ground. Jagger still holding Albert's sword flipped in the air. This is what I want to show you. Albert the knight looked at Jagger and thought, it's like my son. Albert the knight imagined his son after looking at Jagger. He was really a smart kid. Albert Horseman laughed haha. There was applause. King Amelia says we've won, but it feels like we've lost, Albert. The knight Albert with the wound on his face bowed solemnly and replied yes, although not very true, but I meant it. There was a quick step approaching. One muttered to King Amelia, something happened. It's a murder again. On a deserted street somewhere in foggy weather. Jagger patted his chest with his hand. Oh my gosh, my torso. Jagger walked over to where Roche was standing. Roche realized Jagger was coming. Jagger raised his hand and scratched his head and replied, ah, yes. Jagger and Roche stood in front of a gloomy house. It's this place, well, let's go in. Inside the house was empty, not a single item remained. The two of them opened the door and walked inside, Jagger and Roche both looking ahead. Jagger says, this is. Jagger looked at the body lying right in front of him with blood stains on the floor and on the wall. This was too obvious. Jagger stared at the corpse as if looking for something. Jagger then said the weapon used in this case was a long sword. If you look closely, isn't this considered an assassination? Roche replied strangely, but the body was extremely clean. Roche added, we found no visible trace of resistance, except for the wound inflicted by the sword. All the events that have happened so far have been the same. Jagger thought, attacked by a criminal who couldn't resist, there was such a huge skill gap between the two that he couldn't protect himself. Jagger stood up and said it was quite likely that this was the result of his acquaintance. Roche wondered what the victim's acquaintance was. Jagger imagined the image of the crime. He thought there was really a way that a noble could be assassinated easily, leaving no trace in their own office. Of course there were also cases when assassins were said to be higher-handed, but the likelihood was very low, surely. Jagger turned to ask Roche had he thought of who might have fallen under suspicion. Roche replied at first, I speculated that the person behind it was Prince Tadros. Roche said of previous cases, he had victims around the same time, even the weapons and the traces were similar, just. Roche went on to say that they said there was an inscription left on the scene, written to take down the Warrior of Doom. Jagger wondered, I think these guys are just trying to take advantage of that rumor. Jagger appears with a deadly image. The Warrior of Doom will once again condemn the fallen nobles. Jagger doesn't understand anything. Who can spread that kind of? Roche smiled wryly and replied who he might be. The image that popped into Roche's mind was Fia's. Roche continued, in short, besides that story, there is still a small section of nobles who have not yet appeared any victims. Roche said they were traitors who withdrew their support. Later, Roche and Jagger were walking together in a large apartment. Roche knocked on the door of a room. Pardon, Mr. Jamie Alestro. A man emerged from the room. Jamie asked if there was anything wrong. Jamie is surprised to see Jagger. Jamie told Jagger he was the Warrior of Dooms. His battle with Albert was really impressive. Jagger bowed. He flattered me too much. Roche said, why should we end the greeting here, Sir Jamie? Jamie said, please come in. Jagger and Roche walked into the room together. Roche, Jamie and Jagger sat together at the table talking. Jamie asked what they were here for. Roche replied that the two nobles had been assassinated last night, both of whom were close to Prince Piaz and Prince Tadros. Jamie wondered, what does that have to do with me? Roche replied I'm sure he didn't know, but while everyone around him was dying, he was the only one who survived. Roche added traitors like him, retreaters and women who have trusted to support him. Jamie seems to realize something. Roche asked again, so, aren't you? Jamie picked up his sword and shouted, this guy. Jamie took his sword and said loudly, that damn bastard has been killed. Piaz has changed. It's obvious that he's no longer the person I used to know. Roche angrily pulled out his sword, shutting his mouth shut. That wasn't a name a traitor like you could utter. The two were slowly losing their temper, pointing their swords at each other. The sword-wielding Jamie began to attack Roche first. Roche also stabbed his sword in response. Jagger was still watching that fight intently. Jagger rushed in to stop the two. Jagger said to both of you, please stop. Jagger added that no one really wants to kill anyone. Jamie and Roche were still looking at each other. Jamie told Jagger he too. Jaime's face was furious. Jamie said, was he just a puppet in Pia's hands after all? Jagger had left and returned. Jagger opened the door with his hand. Jagger said, I'm back. Sewell was standing with Minerva and the big cat. Welcome back, Mr. Sig. Jagger asked, what, are you guys waiting for me? Sewell shyly replied, no, it wasn't, I just felt like you were coming so I went to pick you up. Jagger replied, oh well. There's a loud voice, Jagger looked over at Minerva and wondered, what's wrong with her again? Sewell replied. Sewell said sister, she must have been very disappointed that she couldn't help this time. Minerva startled shyly replied, no. Minerva said shyly to Jagger, generally, it's not like that, if you don't use me, this will happen, that's all. Jagger patted Minerva's head, you're disappointed. Minerva angrily replied that I said it wasn't. Jagger said it's been a while, we should go out for a bit. Minerva replied happily, really? Jagger said of course and headed out. Minerva disappointed, this Sig name. Minerva looks at the mice. Minerva wondered why we kept going to places like this. Jagger looked back and said, this is where she can see the true nature of that city. The three kept walking forward. In the humid air, every step they took had water splashing up. Minerva asked in fear, where are we going, this rude Sig? In the distance something was flying towards Jagger, he turned to say. He immediately grabbed the knife with just 2 fingers. Sui nervously exclaimed Sig. Sig just said thank you for this warm welcome. The leader of the group pointed his sword at the other 3 and asked who you were. Jagger replied that I had come to buy information, where is the owner of the guild? The other threatened what he was talking about, leave here quickly. Sig raised his hand for reconciliation, wait, we're not here to fight. I just want to see the owner of the guild. Suddenly the other guy rushed to attack Sig and shouted, why do you keep talking nonsense? Jagger sighed then pinned him hard to the ground, causing him to scream. Ouch. Watching Jagger rush forward, the other rushed to attack the idiot. And then that person was knocked down by him too. Just like that, the rest were also painfully defeated. The other was beaten so badly that his nose and mouth were bleeding. Jagger landed on the ground. Looking the other way asked who the next person was. Suddenly someone said, okay, it's over. Then he continued. I'm not as easygoing as you think. From the peak of the elite to the bottom of the underworld. Welcome to the underground society, where all information is gathered. Arthas, the owner of the underground society. At the headquarters of the underground society. In Arthas' study, Jagger's men were sitting there. How long has it been? 5 years, since we traded at the Parthenon. 5 years, enough to change people. But I'm not sure. Seeing Minerva eating naturally, Sig wondered, but, why are you eating people's food? Minerva said coldly, I still need to ask permission, nothing, just eat. Sig continues the story, the reason I came here is to. Holding the newspaper in his hand, he said, the information of the person written in this newspaper. Arthas wondered. Don't you know that person better than I do? I heard that you condemned them with your own hands. Sig corrected. It's all false news. Arthas objected, but there are many who believe it to be real. You want to know the exact information, not the rumors, right? Let's see. From the newspapers, one hand rushed forward, causing the leopard to fly messily. Arthas said at Sig's surprised expression, they are wild dogs of the underworld, do many illegal things like human trafficking and prostitution, or a doom fighter. Do you know all this? The petitions of all the victims were denied, do you know? And only one person can cover this kind of thing. The image of the Fias Amelia trash prince appears. Arthas continued. Do you understand what it means to rule Fias? Think there will be no hope for the weak. Do you know what will happen after beating Albert Frederick? As it turns out, this is what the puppet means. Turning to look at Arthas, Sig continued as he thought, who was the real culprit of this? Arthas propped his chin in reflection. If Tadris and Fiaz say that it is not them, then it will be the three princes, also known as the Wandering Prince Friz. Sig suddenly recognized the three princes. I see, thank you. Arthas asked if he wanted to go. The two girls who followed Sig slowly left. Now I knew what to do. Arthas watched Jagger in silence. Arthas asks someone what he plans to do next. He may still use his name as a warrior of doom. And the other replies that he is an obstacle to the future of this country. Tonight I will finish him off. At Jagger's house. He was sleeping soundly. Suddenly someone jumped into his room. Slowly approaching where Jagger was sleeping. He raised his sword and placed it in front of Jagger's chest. But thankfully, the dark-haired man flew over to stop him. The dark-haired man blocked his attack and said his senses were good. There's this real assassin tonight. Jagger opened his eyes and sat up immediately. The guy was startled. Jagger hit the guy the shoulder. Jagger assessed a shallow slash. He moved quite well. The dark-haired man advised the stranger. Give up, you can't escape. That guy jumped in the air. Then fly straight out from the window. The dark-haired man didn't give a damn. How could he let him run? He ordered the guards, arrest him. Jagger suddenly paused and said, looking at the severed wires at the bottom, it was. Jagger picked it up and caught the tail. Someone is walking forward. Suddenly stopped at someone's door. Pull down your hat and sigh. It turns out it was Reyna. Reyna looked around and knocked on the door. It's God. Reyna here, can you come in? The door slowly opened. In front was a beautiful blonde. She said, come in, Reyna. She asked Reyna, how is that? Reyna bowed her head in apology. She held her head. Okay, are you hurt? Well, I haven't finished speaking. From behind, someone flying in. A startled Reyna turned to look. It turned out to be Jagger, he said with a smile. He pointed to the two girls. Thank you for this kind guidance, the royal guard. Reyna stood in front of the princess guard. This was the princess's private room. Even if she was a knight, she was not allowed to be disrespectful. Jagger was cold. This princess was the real killer. Jagger lists Tadris or Piaz, or even the Wandering Prince I think is the perpetrator, but it's actually one other person, Princess Lorelei. Or known as the sub-party, who is behind it all. The princess asked again, do you have any evidence for this accusation? Jagger replied, star proof. Jagger gave the piece of rope and concluded this was a piece of rope that fell off when I fought the assassin earlier, and it seemed to have the same material, compared to the Royal Guard's uniform. Of course, it's hard to conclude someone is the culprit based on this alone, but I have one other method to be sure. The sense of smell of one-fanged tiger is many times superior to a working dog. Just one thread of silk is enough. Reyna asked the princess and pulled out her sword. Do you understand this situation? Perpetrator, sassy. The princess stopped Reyna, stepping back. Reyna looked at the princess puzzledly, but his letter. The princess pointed to the table and chair and said, standing while talking like this, it is a little inconvenient, sit down and I will continue. Jagger agreed. Okay. Jagger gently and calmly sat down in his chair. He then asked, what was the reason behind assassinating these nobles? The princess replied, since they are evil men, deserve to die. Jagger agrees with that, I understand. But what I really wanted to know, was why you assassinated those greedy nobles, when you got no benefit. The princess remembered the bitter past. I didn't care about their misdeeds at first, but as my coming-of-age ceremony approached, Tadris and Piaz, two of them, immediately tried to sell me to the nobles. No matter how old you are, no matter how rotten you are. As long as it's someone who has power, supports them to the throne, it's all right. Jagger wondered if the king hadn't noticed that. The princess didn't understand what you meant, father. As she remembered everything, the princess said that power is everything and the strong own everything. Does one person stay in the supreme position but the person will help someone weak like me? So we have to make our own decisions. Dressed in a dress he didn't like, he wore a fake smile, and the stranger, after being labeled a widow Amelia, finally managed to escape the grip of the nobles. Jagger asked again what that had to do with the murder. The princess replied, I must live in this circle of nobility in order to survive, and witness the injustices that the noble world causes, especially those who suffer death. If you don't like this place, it's a good way to go, you said, yes. But this is a situation where I can't leave. I've tried to change this place to a better place. When we supported Friesard Olivani, the nobles who opposed him were skeptical, and with the support of the nobility we solved the corrupt nobles." Jagger remarked that he had fictionalized this story, but in the end it was all about him, wasn't he? The princess agreed. "I don't deny that." Jagger looked up puzzledly. The princess knelt down in front of him. Jagger was puzzled by what he was doing. "As you said, it was simply to survive at first, but now I am really worried about my country and its people." Seeing this, Reina rushed to Her Highness the Princess. "Why, the next princess I don't want to beg, but if I ignore this time, I will do whatever you want." Jagger reached out his hand to her, lifting the princess's chin to ask again. "Really, whatever," the princess replied firmly yes. Jagger smiled faintly. Suddenly, a crowd of people from outside rushed in. The dark-haired man ordered stop. Two streams of blue and red light are attacking each other. It turns out that Jagger and Reina are fighting. The situation right now is chaotic. Jagger blamed you for coming slower than I expected. The dark-haired guy countered you unusually fast. Yes, from now on we'll take over this place. Then he turned to the two women of the royal guard Reina, the eldest princess Lorelie Amelia. "I will arrest you on charges of murdering nobles." Jagger walked towards the door where there were two people standing guard. Suddenly one of them reached out to block him. "There is no exemption." Jagger spoke up. "Just a little stop by." Suddenly a man offered Jagger a hand that was not allowed to speak over time, invited in. "Look at Amelia sitting on the inside behind the door." Jagger slowly stepped inside. He looked in the direction of the Amelia. The two silently looked in one direction. Amelia smiled faintly. "What are you here for, laughing at me?" Jagger denied. "No, I came here with an offer." Jagger whispered something in Amelia's ear. A bright blue light appeared. At this time Jagger was fighting one older man. He gathered momentum and put the tip of his sword back. Then he swung one hard. The other man who saw this immediately stopped him. He slashed across Jagger's body, but luckily he dodged it, while avoiding Jagger immediately attacking him. He struck one hard to the other man's right. The other man responded with a straight blow from the top. Jagger quickly picked up the attack. He gripped Jagger with his hand. "Then brush him across with your legs." And so the pin knocked him to the ground screaming. He stood by the Jeagle clan's swordsmanship was a way to replenish the lack of mana, with skill and movement effectively. Jagger still groaned painfully. He continued however, his amount of mana seemed to be much less than the others, that wouldn't have worked very well. Jagger agreed. "Yes, that's why I learned Jagger's fighting technique. But I had no intention of giving up the clan's swordsmanship, so I quite liked Jagger's method of combining it with Jagger's style." He said, "There's nothing more to say." Jagger said, "Sir Albert, there are a few things I would like to discuss before starting coaching." He replied, "If it was about Sigmund, there was no need." At this moment Sigmund hit Albert hard in the face with his head. He quickly fought back. Sigmund fell hard to the ground. Albert exclaimed, "Damn, Sigmund, how dare you butt my head like that? Does that deserve to be called a warrior of the Jeagle clan?" Jagger lay on the ground laughing and said, "Who cares about dignity when fighting, so you win, father." Albert asked Jagger something else. He said he was leaving the house. "So what?" Jagger replied that he had learned enough. "And as promised, I'll take this shadow bar." He looked at Sigmund affectionately. Sigmund sacrifices himself to protect him, and he inherits its will. "I've seen it, signature Jeagle." Albert told Jagger, "Instead talk about your intentions after winning the bet. What you want, I will gladly accept, even if it is a request to join Prince Fia's side." Jagger replies that now is not the time to talk about it. "I will deal with things, when those who blindly pursue power gather in one place." Jagger went to find Prince Fias to talk. Fias asked so, he had already made a decision. "What you got from your duel with Lord Albert, can be used to support me." Jagger conditioned instead, "You should deal with this first. You have to give me a reward for the previous mission." Fias agreed. "Ah yes, of course. What do you want, rebuild the clan, or the wealth?" Fias thinks he doesn't think he's going to solve this case. Jagger was silent for a while. "My only request is, complete revocation of all weapon stores in the Kingdom of Amelia." The dark-faced prince said again, "What?" Jagger asks Fias. He knows the first weapon that, right, the Argo clan controls the arms trade of the entire continent. They even sent mercenaries to assassinate me. Don't you know my maxim? Fias continued to pay 10 times more vengeance. He pondered, "What do you think of daring to ask for a full store recall? What benefit do you gain from that?" The prince sighed and said, I understand, we are still in contract right now, so I will try my best, but in my heart Fiaz thinks differently. I will do so now. But later if you become troubled I will immediately get rid of you. Jagger said, thank you, I have one more request, Doom Warrior. Fiaz interrupted angrily. Enough. You crossed the line as soon as you requested a full store recall, now what else do you want? Jagger is serious if that's so important in ending the royal succession war. Fiaz replied. End the war of succession, what do we need to do? Jagger replied, I heard that the trial of Lorelei Amelia will take place in the next few days. Gather all the nobles in the new Toman in that place. Isn't the shirt of the battle for the imperial throne, the flashier it is, the better? Fiaz grinned wickedly, and I can finally defeat the Tadras and take the throne. He thinks if I become king, those shops are nothing. Fiaz closed. Good decision, I'll do as you say. Painting for the throne of stars, we just need to rest until then. After he finished speaking, the other prince left immediately. In the back Sui and Minerva ask each other what's the end. Minerva told Jagger, you talked for a long time. That human was disgusting, he hid his intentions very discreetly. Jagger surprised her, her intuition was better than I thought. Sui asked Sir Sig, would you really do what he said, or if you had any other intentions? Jagger replied, like he didn't answer, if I said it now, it wouldn't be interesting, and I didn't want to say it yet. And the actors gather and the stage is set up. Then the story of those who pulled us into this spiral will also come to an end. And now in a certain house of the kingdom, someone fell hard to the ground. The white-haired guy. What the hell is going on? Roche interrupted. Please be quiet while I'm on duty. We are investigating the allegations. If you intentionally obstruct, you will plead guilty to additional charges. What the hell is the other man screaming? Argos exclaimed. It's confusing. If something like this happens, do you have to tell us, or are you not satisfied with our support? At this point the scene turned to the face of the Fiaz prince. Argos said, even if it's a little disappointing, isn't this a bit too much? Fiaz Ta apologizes for that, however, this is now more than just an ordinary tax investigation. A huge arsenal of weapons is spread throughout the whole of Amelia. A dismantling order has been issued for all plots there. The man cried out in panic. The man who is intent on expelling the most advanced weapons from this country, is this not allowed? Fiaz said graciously that tax evasion, illegal movement of funds, even allegations of bribery, the reason for the tax investigation was enough. The white-haired man protested, but Prince, all these are under the endowment fund for people, and only for reasons it is unacceptable to withdraw advanced weapons. Fiaz replied, not that you got the same sponsorship from the back, we're in a drama walking on a rope to see who is emperor. And many more allegations of exploitation and fraud against other races will also be dismissed. The fact that everyone knows, advanced weapons are developing, thanks to the exploitation of the labor of star dwarves. Finally, Fiaz asked Sir Argos what he thought. We put on our hats and replied that merchants have their own methods of livelihood. Fiaz was surprised indeed. What about the hero's assassination? At this time, the other two felt awkward about how to choose. Fiaz says the Crow mercenaries are a collection of SSS-level mercenaries. Whatever mission they undertake, there is not a single survivor left. Especially Captain Mark Blelime, who said he was a talented man who took on an entire legion himself, hired such a man to assassinate Amelia's hero. If I hadn't covered this up, you would all have been in jail. Argos agreed. Yes, Prince, however, what worries me is such pressure. May I consider inviting Mr. Tadras? Fiaz replied with a smile. No problem. I won, so the news will spread soon. Argos thinks he has faith in. The white-haired man protested absurdly. Mr. Fiaz's influence was inferior to Sir Tadras. Argos heard this and told him to take him to a quiet place. Subordinate, yes, I understood. He shouted, wait, let go of me, Dad, wait. Argos said, please don't get me wrong, it's just that he expressed his frustration. Take this as a sincere apology for this disrespect. Fiaz laughed and told me to accept it as an apology, and forgive any bad actions. Fiaz touched the chest and said, don't worry too much, once I become emperor. After he finished speaking, the other Fiaz prince also turned to leave. Before leaving, he turned around and said everything would go back to the way it was. At this point all three fell silent. Argos said unhappily once again, you show the disappointing side, we are horsemen, not those who will hire assassins to assassinate others. The white-haired man justified what he had done disrespectfully to the emperor who wanted to punish the scoundrels. Argos agreed. As you say, to condemn a man is an insult. However, it is also my fault that I did not verify that the item was the cursed sword. The man sighed. It seems that cooperating with you is inappropriate. After he finished speaking, the man also turned to leave. Tears fell on the son, who said he just wanted to recognized by you, father. Jagger comforted him. Don't be too disappointed, master, I'm sure God did this out of love for you. The white-haired man cried as he said, the hero of the cursed sword, all for him. I'm not going to end like that, Jagger. He called. Hey, Jagger. Yes, master. He laughed and cried hysterically, I still have the sword that someone else doesn't. At this time, on the inside of the room was stored a certain sword. Jagger asked the master again, who was sure, if things got worse, the white-haired man urged him to hurry up and stop talking. He bit his nails as he said, hand over that sword to the right mercenaries and call him, they will clash, and then, he will be defeated. Sacrifice is inevitable, but what's wrong, once the sword is sealed, isn't it all over? At this time, on the other chain appeared red auras. Jagger said, no gloves, you will manipulate, so please step back. The white-haired man agrees, I understand. Someone's voice rang out, longing for it. The other boy froze and said. The man who saw that he was about to approach shouted at the master, don't come close. Suddenly a voice said, come here. I will give you the strength to take it all. The other worker called out to the master again. The voice rang out again, I will satisfy all your desires. Jagger shouted, master, don't fall into the trap. He gripped his sword tightly. That voice rang out again, until death took you away. Burn, die, yearn for it, I will give you strength. He sweated in response, what's going on? One of someone's feet is approaching. Seeing this, he looked up. Then I saw one redhead staring at him, then asked who you were. The redhead said I was Artemis, or another name was Lust for the sword. I will be with you until you turn to ashes. Artemis stared at him. Then he leaned over, his head about to touch the tip of her shoe. The voice rang out again and consumed everything. Now around the two red people seemed to be engulfed in flames. And the following is the information of the Artemis sword. The sword Lust amplifies the user's desire. The flaming blade and hilt evoke fiery red fire. It can emit flames similar to the breath of dragons. At this moment a dark-haired man rode away in the middle of the bustling crowd. Roche shouted, Warrior of Doom, which has instilled fear in the new Timian over the past few months. The serial killer nobleman has been spotted. Reina continued. The main culprit is the royal guard Reina Similian. Let me go. Do you know what Her Highness went through in doing this? Meanwhile, the eldest princess was silent and said nothing. The main accomplice was Princess Lorelei Amelia. Amelia thought she didn't regret dragging Reina into this incident, or even using the Warrior of Doom, all for herself. But suddenly there was one person standing in front of her holding a bouquet of flowers given to her. It turns out it's a little girl. The little girl said, Princess, here it is. Amelia thought, I'm really not wrong. People call the princess, Princess Lorelei. Amelia thinks what she wants to protect, I'm so grateful, are these people. She reached over to accept the bouquet of flowers the other girl had given her, but was knocked out by a guard. Roche said coldly, it's time, let's go, princess. Amelia thinks that everything has come to this country, there can be no turning back, my fate, the future of the people of the country, I will set you free Jeagle. At the place of judgment, Amelia was kneeling, someone boldly said Prince Theodorus, now heir apparent, should ascend the throne. The old-fashioned people, don't you know that the Fia's prince is a favorite of the people? It was rumored that not only the warrior perished, but also Sir Albert became a member of the Fia's prince, so why did Prince Theodorus display such a look? Suddenly he shouted, silence. You've done something very interesting, Laurel. Amelia said she had gotten rid of the parasites that were gnawing at the kingdom, and the emperor said, Amelia continues to kill the filthy nobles who are eating away at the kingdom, for its people, killing. You can do it again. Fias interrupted her, no, she was a killer. If I fail to solve this case, there will be even more sacrifices, for Amelia's honor will be diminished. The nobles saw that I was right, but everyone agreed. Denouncing the murder of nobles, applauding the Prince of Fias, they constantly chanted the name Fias. Fias arrogantly thought, yes, my name is Fias Amelia. Look at my feats, great feats, and hail that I am strong, worthy to be emperor. Fias ended up down one. Someone's hand rubbed Fias's orange blonde hair evenly. It's Mother Fias, she says, my little son, why are you crying? Fias asked her mother, why can't I dine with my father and brother, just because of my hair of different colors? She told Fias to think about your father's words. No, your majesties. The strong will take it all. That's how things go, my little son. Fias looked up at the tall throne. He kept looking ahead aimlessly. Fias asked Signature Jeagle, what do you think? I heard you have something to say about this incident. Sig replied, yes, I have something important to say to everyone. Fias thinks Signature Jeagle, keep thy word, and join Albert in swearing allegiance to me here. Jagger turned around. Seeing that it wasn't okay, Fias suddenly became panicked. Jagger looked in his direction, smirking disdainfully. Jagger says, what I mean is, Doris Amelia and Fias Amelia are bastards who don't deserve to appear in this world anymore. The atmosphere around this time suddenly became silent. People don't understand what you're talking about, praise a little, because you're a doom warrior after all, but you don't seem to know how scary this world is. You have to put him in jail for defamation against the royal family. Someone orders the order. His Majesty asked Jagger to go on. Jagger continued, this is the list of victims. At the same time, the list of nobles who are aiming. As he turns over the document, Jagger tells Hanswin to kidnap girls from his domain, and force them to become prostitutes. Ophelia Wedrigo lent usury, if it could not be repaid, sold to slave traders. The rest, these criminals all have something in common. That's the part they all got was given to one person to keep these incidents secret. Isn't it? The prince, Fias and Doris look alarmed. Jagger goes on to say that the prince is the leader of the corruption and the princess is the one who gets rid of them. Exactly who brings disgrace to the Amelia clan. Fias counter, this is one conspiracy, how dare you say such words about the royal family. Doris complied, yes, all she did was murder. No one testified for her. Jagger asked if you wanted witnesses. One of someone's feet is advancing. People are stunned at Sir Albert, the knight. What does Sir Albert do here? Albert said, I wish everyone could listen to the sound out there. Outside, people chanted, Princess, release the people, let the public free. Freedom for the princess, the innocent princess. They kept chanting the princess. Jagger said as he looked at the princess to prove her purity, everyone gathered, remember what I said, take the throne. Surprise princess, what do you say? Jagger demanded. Take responsibility for who started. Become queen, those are the atoners. The princess said, Signature Jeagle, did you plan all this? At this moment all the people in that room bent down in unison to kneel before the Lorelei. Someone speaks up in the presence of everyone here. We pledge to serve Princess Lorelei to the best. The princess wondered why. I am nothing but a murderer. Albert called the princess. The two guards also called out to the princess. The people outside chanted the princess. Lorelei blushed and turned to look at Jagger. He lowered his head in front of the Lorelei and called out to the princess. She squeezed the dress she was wearing with her two hands. Then Lorelei gave a smile full of contentment and happiness. The other emperor also smirked. The proud emperor, I have overcome fear. The princess replied, yes, father. The emperor continued, before the dismayed faces of Fias and Doris, the ruler need not have superior talent. Or the eldest child, it doesn't have to be male. But there is one thing, the person must be strong. And look, it seems like you're the strongest person here. In a space filled with flowers, Lorelei Amelia became the first queen of the Amelia kingdom. In the bedroom, in the middle of the room is a large bed. Lorelei went to his sleeping quarters and the servants walked behind Lorelei. Lorelei sat down for the servants to take care of his hair. The servants watched his master happy and the servants happy as well. The king must be strong. He becomes the sunshine that illuminates all the subjects of the world. When people die away, they will turn to the sunshine to pray. A boy in tough armor against his sword to the ground. In order to maintain the empire, one had to turn a blind eye to some misfortune. The hands around him offered. Before that, the king is sitting on his chair, and the stronger you become, the lonelier you will be. Remember that, under the golden right, bloodshed is inevitable. In front of him was his daughter. He asked if she could become such an existence, to which she replied. She said, blood will never be shed in Amelia while you rule. If your father enlightens all his subjects, it is sunshine. Surrounded by a blood-red sky, you will take care of even the lowest place. In front of her, there was a guy holding out his hand towards her, and everyone around her was watching. Suddenly she had a new initiative and exclaimed that she was going to be sunshine. Can I prove it? Okay. Time will tell, father. The future of Amelia. There is a ray of light in her hand. The image was of a queen in her arms who had a powerful glow after getting makeup, changing into new clothes and putting on a tiara. Lorelei lowered her head and looked at her hand, and the servant said, Princess, it's time. Lorelei was sitting in her chair nervously, when a girl walked up behind her to stand behind her. Lorelei turned around and said to Reina, "Reina, how am I now? Do I look okay? You really are like the sunshine of Amelia. If you don't hurry up you will miss it, if it is him." Reina replied that surely, if it was him. Lorelei stood up and lifted the dress slowly. Lorelei said casually, "Of course. In the garden there are 2 girls and 1 guy named Jagger, surrounded by very cute pets coming. He said you guys are packing it all. When you are done, follow the original plan." The girl said, "Why did you leave in such a hurry?" The guy replied, "Sig, I don't want to get involved in any more trouble." A cat walked up to the girl and looked up at her. She whispered, "Why was that?" She said, "Hey Minerva," and let the day leave like that. After they finished talking, Jagger's men walked forward together. The guy looking ahead, Jagger, suddenly paused. Lorelei said, "You were going to leave without saying goodbye, in response to your majesty." Lorelei casually told Jagger, "Not yet." Lorelei took down the crown on his head with his hand. Lorelei looked at his crown and said he had to officially celebrate his coronation, sometimes wondering if this crown was too heavy for him. "You think I want to be as free as you are," Jagger said with a laugh. "It is you who lead it, so you must be held accountable to the end." Reina exclaimed angrily, "How dare you despise the princess?" Lorelei not only didn't get angry, but also told Reina to stay calm. "Okay Reina." Lorelei said, "But also asked you to take responsibility." Jagger surprised, "Star." Lorelei said, "I watched you out of admiration for you, and you condemned those embezzled nobles, like you had an initiative in the future." Lorelei said shyly, "So, Sig, you too, expect you to take responsibility for what you have started." "I'll take responsibility," she replied in surprise. Jagger stood in front of her and said, "If you change again, I'll come back and condemn you." She turned her head to say, "I understood." Jagger didn't seem to know what she meant here. Lorelei handed the Jagger 1 piece of paper. "You said you were on a mission to Sigmar. I hired you for a mission to go to the cabin, and it didn't look like you were going to charge me for this." The guy replied that, "I don't like debt at all, but I appreciate that." She coughed shyly. If he had said that. Jagger turned his head. The 2 girls behind him also erupted in anger. She looked at yelling, "Nothing." Jagger touched Lorelei's head lightly and said it was gentle. "This hairstyle suits him very well," and they both turned away shyly. Lorelei shyly knelt down on the ground. Seeing that, Rian nervously called out to the queen. Lorelei blushed a little regretfully, turning to look at Reina. She then silently watched the shadow of Jagger's back. At a certain road, the weather is very nice and fresh. Jagger said how early in the morning she had grimaced. Minerva replied, annoyed. Minerva jumped up and threw her arms and legs around and said, "Why fighting is always Sui and not me." Jagger turned his head angrily and said, "Stop, are you a child, huh?" Sui said softly to Jagger, "Sir Sig, please understand me a little." Minerva above said the demon swords were always connected to the people she had bonded with, which was why if she was separated from the Sig, Jagger in the middle held 2 different colored swords. Sui at the bottom said he would feel anxious and lonely. Minera was embarrassed. In other words, she felt lonely. She turned around and said she was lying. "I was just bored." Jagger complimented with Minerva's face. She also had a cute face. "If you feel lonely, tell me." Jagger rubbed Minerva's head with his hand. "Ha." Suddenly Sui said, "I was lonely too, so I wanted to follow him." The pet in the back said helplessly, "Don't be mistaken. I'm just following you for the free meals." Jagger said, "Okay. I guess so too." He was walking when suddenly the Jagger stopped, causing Minerva to bump into him and cry out, "Ah, Sig, this idiot. Why did you stop so suddenly?" Minerva angrily reproached him. Sui asked, "Mr. Sig, what's wrong?" The guy with the paper looked at it and said, "This task." Jagger exclaimed, "Car isn't, so." Sui said, "If Car is the one looking for us, then at least say hello, right?" The guy said, "It's better not to do that. Because he's an idiot. Sig, this organization is gone, surrounded by fires." Car couldn't hear that and smirked. Car isn't able to stand in front of the corpses he killed earlier at his feet. He exclaimed, "For justice." Jagger had frowned and looked at the paper as if he was frightened by something. A complete madman, Car isn't looking ahead. The scene before us at a magnificent palatial palace shrouded in a dark color. Car isn't able to walk towards Viscount Philip, who was standing in front. Regardless of the geographical distance, the tall and the low, the 2 eyes still staring at each other. Viscount Philip Jamas, having committed the crime of magic, and conducted experiments on the people of this kingdom. I, the warrior of justice Car Isnable, will execute thee. Car Isnable. The Puritan handle pointed directly at the opposite. Car Isnable's undefeated aura did not frighten the Viscount. He smirked disdainfully, ha ha ha, laughed to death, Star Warrior. He fiercely struck the chest of the guard next to him with his hand. His gaze had turned black. He screamed as he screamed, do you think those 5 great heroes will protect you? The man beside him suddenly turned into a big, muscular monster. He immediately jumped down. A terrifying explosion occurred. Car Isnable raised his hand in front of the dust barrier. At this moment, the monster's eyes lit up, reflecting the terrifying face. The Viscount now above ordered, advancing on the berserker, for the heroes who dare to enter my territory, see your strength. The monster twitched, raised his fangs bared. He rushed towards Car Isnable, causing Car Isnable to also strike a blow. He knew that this was a magical monster humanoid experiment, so he didn't hesitate to generate power. A thud sounded. Car wasn't able to pierce a hole in the other man's body, causing him to explode. He looked gravely at the Baron. The wardrobe knew he was about to face death and was frightened and rushed away. Car isn't able to raise his weapon, then gather lightning back into his weapon. Then darted towards the other Viscount, causing him to explode to shreds. And then there is one rumble. A huge explosion occurred at the castle like a fireworks display. Car darkened his face. The blood of the other Viscount splashed on the shoulder of his shirt. He stood there looking at the spear that was planted in the ground. Then proceeded to take it in his hand. He was about to turn and leave. People are cheering you. Look, the warriors of justice who saved us. They are the ones who were harmed by Philip. One ran back, warrior, you saved us. A bloodstain appeared in front of the other guy, which surprised him greatly, thinking he would save them, but somehow, or did he stab them with his own spear? He froze to look at the corpses down there. A man with tears in his eyes questioned him, warrior, why did you do this to us? We were just victims, in Philip Jama's experiments. Car swung another sword. A bright line cut through his body. You explained to him, yes, I know, however, all this happened because of your weakness. Weakness is also a sin. And the healer of that sin is me, because I am a warrior of justice. The other ended up dying on your own spear. He gave a smile that made the hair on the back of his neck creep. Above all, such tragic events no one can survive, so I am different, you understand? Yes, this madman is Car Isnable, who is called the warrior of justice. After killing the ill-fated victim, Car Isnable to throw his body into a pool of blood with his brother. A distant voice called his name, Mr. Car. Hybrid waved his hand concerned and asked, is his body okay? Walking beside her was a young athlete. Car Isnable's gaze changed completely to look at Hybrid. I'm fine. How about you, Hybrid? How are you? Asked by Car. She quickly replied, thank you for your attention. Her eyes looked behind her in fear. Well, in the end, it seemed that there were no survivors. In front of her were dozens of lives lying on the ground. Car lied without blinking. Yes, when I found out, it was just an unfortunate accident. The war god was indeed a war god to lie just as high. It's sad, but justice is built on rebirth. The girl's eyes filled with sadness, replying, yes, Mr. Car. Car quickly changed the subject. Well, let's finish this and try the next task. The girl obediently replied, yes. He looked at the letter in his hand. Car is not satisfied with his task, changes it. But he also replied, I don't want to. Minerva shouted angrily, come on, mankind, he is very sinister, if you don't obey, he won't let you live in peace. Seeing everyone's anger, he raised his hand to support his forehead, looking at the contents of the letter. The other man said that Sir Amelia suddenly assigned the warrior task. It was an emergency situation, so he dealt with it urgently, so it was difficult to remove. Jagger suddenly placed his hand on Sui's shoulder, causing her to panic. His other hand rested on the Minerva's shoulder, making her unable to react. Jagger explained to the old merchant, these children, do you see them? They are like my little sisters. Sui and Minerva blushed and said, Mr. Sig, it's too close, let go, you idiot. The old merchant did not hesitate to say bluntly, in a dangerous trip but S-level mission, it would not be okay to take the children with him. Right. He held out his hand to tell to be quiet, try to change his opinion. The holy land of Carbon is the home of spirits and dwarves, the land of joys and orgs. It has been ruled for centuries, and only gained independence 5 years ago. Resources around the world are directed towards this place. This is an opportunity for his precious sisters, experience cultures all over the world. Even if I want to change it, first of all only this task leads to Toriazon. Even if I want to change it, I have no intention of changing it. Miverna discussed with Jagger, "Oh Sig, it didn't work or just play it." Jagger was not happy to refuse, couldn't avoid that guy at all costs. Suddenly a voice echoed, "Oh, isn't that the Warrior of Doom? Everyone is excited, you Warrior of Justice, Mr. Car Isnable, so handsome." The male protagonist turned his head back, he should have avoided this. Minerva standing next to nudged Jagger's hand. He inexplicably bent down to look. Miverna now glanced at him with a smile, jealous. Car I Sable said hello, long time no see, signature Jiggle. Jagger turned to reply, "You're pretty good this time, Car Isnable." Hybrid was now quite displeased that Jagger's indifference turned to point directly at him. "Hey doomed warrior, even if you are one of the 5 great warriors, what is that attitude towards Car?" Isnable patted her on the shoulder earlier. "Hybrid, you're getting into a conversation between old friends, aren't you?" She obeyed. "Yes, Mr. Car." Jagger thought to himself, he didn't want to get involved in this, but somehow, "I want to take these kids back to their homeland." Looking at the beasts he brought back who were looking at him with adorable eyes. He compromised and replied, "Ha, this is the first time." The old merchant said, "You have planned very well, there are 5 great heroes on our side. There is nothing to worry about. In fact, there have been thieves causing trouble around the neighborhood lately." Jagger stands by and says, "The lack of duties is justified." The old merchant is serious, "You will not be able to imagine what you are defending." The frame then shifts to a carriage heading for the snowy mountain. Car Isnable put on his robe, sat in the carriage thinking to himself, "This must be a comfortable ride." Jagger's group chose to walk. Sui hiding behind him said, "Is it the day when I was in trouble for someone named Car? I can." He smiled, rubbing his head comfortingly, "It's not like that, I'm just thinking about one thing." Jagger's eyes showed weariness. He recalled the bloody image before. After the murder was done, Car Isnable to glance at Jagger. He covered one of his eyes and stared at Car Isnable. Now that he thought about it, he was still in the habit of touching the side of his scarred eye. Jagger said nothing. The scene shifts to a moving carriage in the snow. The image is getting closer and closer. Because it was so cold, the Minerva blackened constantly. She hugged the cat and whined, "It's so cold, I'm freezing to death." Jagger said, "Didn't I tell you to change? You refused to change." Look at Sui, she didn't complain just now. Seeing that, Sui smiled and explained, "Because she was born like that." He took the fur cloak over the Minerva's head, stopped moaning, "Put this on." Under the cold her face flushed. Minerva said reluctantly, "Thank you Sig, you are my servant." Jagger glared, "Stop talking nonsense and hurry up your feet." At the Carbon Frontier, the neutral zone. Inside the beer hall, the people inside the brasserie were drinking beer deliciously. Entering the shop, Minerva exclaimed, it felt like being revived, so sleepy. Sui sat and asked, "Sig, this place is called Star Carbon." Jagger looked around to see that everyone was asleep. He pulled his chair closer. Not this was a neutral zone near the border. He told Sui about the holy nation of Carbon, which was built in races that had been oppressed by humanity. Spirits, dwarves, orcs, werewolves, and humanoid races will be in the majority. For hundreds of years it has been in isolation, to avoid being enslaved by humanity again. Minerva woke up now, and said, "No matter what, it seems that humanity only likes to do ugly things." At this time, Hubert's bodyguard spoke, "But one day many races will be able to freely cross this continent." The 3 stood up warily. Jagger silently assessed. He happened to join the conversation. Gino continued to speak without paying attention to the 3 of them. The king of Carbon, Dimitri, who had worked hard for a world in which their species would no longer be distinguished. The beginning of trade with other countries was also due to his efforts. Isable approached and said, "Gino, that's just the positive part. Why don't you talk about the negative?" Thanks to him, lawless places like this, there are no taxes at all, and the lords are popping up everywhere. Jagger interjected now, "Why don't you use your own table?" Isable laughed, "Haha, the other places are full. Let me invite you instead." He generously offered everyone a tray of expensive food, full of seafood, baked goods, etc. The 2 quickly enjoyed the food. The sauce was mixing with gravy, eating this wonderful meal, to soothe the tired body. Minerva skewers a big steak, then, "I'll eat it deliciously." Minerva was happily eating when a hand passed by. As soon as she ate a piece of Minerva she had tears in her eyes, blushing, both her face and her body trembling. Jagger reached out and rubbed her head, slowly. As he was eating, "Where did the rude blonde come from? These guys only know how to heal, break their backs." Jagger came over and shouted, "Hey." At this point he apologized sheepishly. Sorry, ruined your meal. Jagger asked him directly, are you going to pay for this meal? He thick-faced refused. No, why should I? Out of anger, Jagger gave him a blow that sent him splashing away. The table shattered like an explosion. Two of his men came running. Leader, bastard, who are you? The now sober leader shouted, Dog, what the fuck are you doing? Jagger threw another slash. The sword was plunged into the ground right in the middle of the man's groin. His eyes filled with danger. Jagger said, are you going to pay for this? That guy immediately handed him one bag of money. Assertion, that's all I have. Sable spoke at this time as if not satisfied. Not yet, signature Jiggle. Jagger turned to stop him. Hey, wait, you. A warrior shouldn't have mercy on the wicked. The leader now looked at the sword in fear. What? I gave you all the money. Carr couldn't immediately slash across the man. He now painfully clutched his arm. His juniors nervously ran to call out to the leader. The leader, who knew what fear was, tried to ask, You, what is your name? Carr I Sable look at them. I do not profess before evil people. Carr Isnable. Carr couldn't help but look over at Jagger, then he immediately looked away. Jagger added of her being a warrior of justice. Chieftain now, I will miss your face. After they left, Jagger thought about it. It had been pretty quiet these past few weeks. I Sable said, 2 of the 5 great heroes are here. Are you? Do you dare to do it? Jagger reproached. It was you who caused this. Why drag me in? The other carriage moved again. A male voice sounded right now. I'm waiting for you, Carr Isnable. This man is the chieftain. He stood arrogantly on the castle. I haven't seen you in a long time. I said I will miss your face. The stranger behind him turned into a burning ball of fire. He said, then, as a greeting, get off your mother to hell. His men immediately launched their magic towards the Jagger. Then one very loud explosion took place. Jagger frowned. Water from the inside of the wall flows out and pours down. The carriage below prepared for the deluge. After his destruction in the diner the day before, the water on the inside of the city walls rushed down. Right where the carriage was moving. The people below looked up in panic. The water was right in front of them. Jagger told everyone, get out of here quickly. Carr Insnable also spoke, carrying only essentials, abandoning the carriage. Jagger looked at the blue-haired merchant standing in front of him. Hurry up, you're going to die now. The merchant turned his face with a nervous smile. No, I cannot. Running away from duty is a shame, and saying that disgrace to a merchant. I will face death along with my possessions. Jagger thought in panic. No, if he died, then I won't get any compensation. Let me take care of this on my own. Jagger said determinedly, I'll deal with this. The merchant said with a worried face, wondering, do you have any plans? Carr Insnable said to Jagger, you're such brave and stubborn, signature Jagger. Carr Insnable looked at the rushing waterfall. Do you think you can stop that yourself? Jagger said a soul. A vortex-forming aura around Jagger gathered into the sword in Jagger's hand. Carr Insnable looked towards Jagger. Could it be magic? A huge ice sword was created from Jagger's magic. It looked powerful, surrounded by ice auras that were being emitted. This is Soul's unique skill. Jagger unleashed the god's soul move. Then Jagger launched that giant ice sword forward, where the waterfall is falling. And just like that, it was confronted by the rushing waterfall that was falling. Jagger's attack collided with the waterfall forming ice shortly after touching. And it seemed that the attack worked. The waterfall was completely frozen. At the same time, everyone around them turned their eyes to look up with surprise. People looked at the majestic ice on the wall. Once settled, Jagger breathed a sigh of relief in the cold of the ice. Carr Insnable told Jagger the magic in the ice, not expecting him to have this power. Jagger thought anxiously, damn, he shouldn't have seen when he wielded the cursed sword. Jagger replied that this wasn't the time to talk about it. Carr Insnable looked at Jagger with a sword, said to Jagger, no, if you get that power potion by cheating, I will kill you immediately. There was a loud voice, you are great. The merchant approached Jagger and Carr with happy expressions. I never thought a condemning hero like you would have magical powers. Thank you so much, let me live. Jagger looked up at the wall. Don't worry about carrying things with customers right away. Merchant wondered, didn't he stop the flood? Jagger pointed his finger upwards. It turned out that the other guy's men were heading towards them on pieces of ice. Ha ha ha, killing them and stealing everything. The frightened merchant exclaimed, oh my god. Carr Insnable picked up his weapon. Just like you said, this isn't the right time. Let's talk about it. Jagger replied, instead of wasting time on it, let's deal with the trouble you caused. The swordsman glanced to the other side. He looked towards the splendid carriage. Why did he keep only that carriage, and throw it all away? He gestured to the black man next to him. The other immediately chanted the spell that created one fireball. And striking the other car, the fireball flew quickly towards the car in the driver's gaze. Seeing this, Jagger suddenly turned to look. Jagger used firepower to rush towards the car. Damn. At this point the Jagger appeared in front of the fireball, and used the weapon that was about to attack it. A bright spark passed by, slashing the fireball. The fireball deflected to the back of the car and broke in half. Something peeked out from inside. Jagger immediately turned to look in surprise. Someone fell from the car. Jagger quickly picked up the man. Jagger asked the girl, "Are you okay?" The hat of the cloak fell off, showing an ear like the ear of a spirit. Jagger looked at the girl's face. It seems that her jewelry is all expensive items, high-end cosmetics and perfume. The shy girl said, yes, Jagger surprised, elf. The elf girl said shyly again, "Thank you, hero." Jagger thought it looked like she was an aristocrat from the holy nation. Jagger told the girl, "No need for something I have to do." She hides her identity to avoid being targeted. Oh well, elf. The blue-haired man was heading towards Jagger's place with his accomplices. The guy behind the sinister expression, "If you sell this little one, you will make a lot of money." The blue-haired man quickly replied that this race is now the highest price. The Jagger's legs were trembling in fear. Jagger looked at them anxiously. The constant use of skills in combat meant that he was exhausted mana, also exhausted, and could not use the cursed sword because of this elf girl. Jagger picked up his sword and said, "It seems that there is no other way." Jagger picked up the elf girl by the arm and immediately ran away from the two. "Let's run." The two of them shouted, "This idiot, take it." Someone's scream appeared behind Jagger with light emitted. Jagger turned to look back. If the accusing hero can't handle something like this. Car Insnable, after tackling all the bad guys, tries to flee, leaving the battlefield. Car Insnable glanced at Jagger. "I think I've overestimated you, accusing hero." The merchant extended his hand to welcome the elf girl back to the car. "So now I will escort the noble guest. Please go this way." The elf girl blushed and turned to look at Jagger. Jagger also glanced over at the girl. She said to Jagger, "Hey hero, thank you." Jagger replied, "It should be done." Sig, hearing the call, startled him back. Sewell along with the big cat and Minerva were heading towards Jagger. He was safe. Jagger replied, "Well, so did the two of you." Sewell said the big cat protected her. Minerva pointed up and said, "He took special care of those who dared to attack me." Big cat was glad to hear those words. Jagger said, "If everyone is okay, let's go." The three of them happily looked ahead. The carriage now continued to move to the target, to the Toriajan. Toriajan is the capital of the Holy Kingdom. It was one nation founded by the race, persecuted in the northernmost part of the continent. Despite attacks from demon gods or dragon invasions, Toriajan never falters or gives up, the introduction making Toriajan's image powerful. The carriage now arrived at the gates of the city walls. To reach the Sigmare, one had to get a passport from this place. Jagger lowered his head thoughtfully. Looking ahead he was surprised. Oh. It turns out that in front there are many different races walking together on the street peacefully and without discrimination. Free Minerva, Sewell, Big Cat are looking up excitedly. Arriving, we have finally arrived. Jagger patted Minerva and Sewell's heads. I know you two are excited, but calm down, don't mess around, behave properly and keep quiet. Most of the races in the Carbon have a hostile attitude towards humans. Minerva is glad to run forward. Oa. What is that? Jagger angry, this girl. Minerva pointed excitedly at the orcs ahead. Hey Sig. Look at this. Wahaha, that's big. Then Minerva continued to point at the beast beside her. This side is tiny. The beast is not very happy. Minerva pointed again to a sleek coat, and over there it was fluffy. Minerva delightfully approached to caress her. It liked it too much, more than the tail of the big cat. There was a call, hey. A terrifying look from the werewolf. Who do you think you are to mess with me, man? Minerva pointed to Jagger. You are such a stupid puppy who knows nothing. Do you know who my servant is, that notorious accusatory hero? If you don't want to lose sleep tonight, you better not touch me. The werewolf with a look of indignation said, what kind of person is the hero of the new year, who is it? Minerva froze in shock because he didn't know Jagger. Jagger held his head in one hand and said, Minerva, and the name of the accusing hero, is just a symbol of fear that surrounds the kingdom of Amelia. The werewolf turned his face and said, "Huh, that's a title too great for a mediocre human like you." The werewolf said to the Jaeger men, "Stop babbling all over here." He then slammed into Sool's body, the blow sending Sool flying out. Jaeger quickly picked up Sool. "What's up, Sool, you're okay?" Sool replied, "It's okay, thank you Sig." Jaeger darkened his face and said. Jaeger glared at the werewolf, "I understand that you don't like humans." He kicked his body hard with his legs, and the werewolf held out his hands to support him. Jaeger looked closely, "But you must not touch others so gratuitously." The werewolf said angrily, "This damn human name." He clenched his teeth. The werewolf held out his clutches. "It's always the humans you provoke to touch us first." He said indignantly, "You stole our children this time." Jaeger replied, "I don't understand what you're saying." Jaeger draws his sword, "But from the moment you pull out your weapon, this is no longer a battle but a battle." Looking at Jaeger, he broke out in a cold sweat. The Jaeger blazed with aura. What? How could he radiate such a powerful aura? The werewolf's eyes flashed. Then heading towards Jaeger, the werewolf attacks Jaeger with his clutches. Jaeger quickly raised his sword and slashed one time. The two rushed in as if to devour each other alive. Suddenly somewhere there was a blue light, falling from the sky right in the middle, causing the two of them to step back. The ground there burst. The silhouette of someone slowly sitting up where the light had just landed. A dwarf with his athletic hammer. Enough. There seemed to be some misunderstanding between the two. Jaeger immediately realized, it's the dwarf who is with Carr. The werewolf said angrily, "Why are you protecting humans, Gwenin?" The dwarf pointed towards the Jaeger people. "His identity has been verified. Can you consider them my guests and glance at them?" He turned to leave and clicked his tongue tightly. Werewolf says, "People." The werewolf, who had just walked with a sinister expression, turned around. "Don't frolic at the moment you let your guard down. Countless fangs will tear you apart." Jaeger watched, a rather harsh and fierce greeting. The dwarf happily replied, "Letting me deal with it for you." The dwarf with a cheerful expression crossed his arms in front of his chest, introduced himself. "Now what kind of introduction? I am the leader of the Stone Guild, and the comrade of the Hero of Justice." Gwenin said, "The human organization is quite active these days, so everyone is very sensitive." Gwenin touches the Jaeger people. "You humans stand out too much in Toryajan, where without any sympathy for humans, it seems he needs a local guide." After hearing something that caught Gwenin by surprise, "Really, a condemning hero who wields a dark sword?" Carr Isnable replied, "That's right, so keep an eye on him at Carbon." The girl with Carr laughed and said, "If you use it for a cursed sword, you'll go crazy." Carr Insnable replied, "No, my eyes will not be deceived." Recalling that image, Jaeger wielded the ice sword. Carr Isnable said it was definitely a cursed sword, but I don't know how he was able to maintain his sanity. Gwenin replied, "Even if he wielded the cursed sword, there were differences in how the sword was dominated." Carr Isnable said, "The moment he falls under the control of the cursed sword, I will defeat him." Carr Isnable laughed sinisterly, "It's unfortunate and shameful, but for justice's sake, there's no other choice." The girl in Carr Isnable's party waved, "I'll investigate more about that cursed sword with Ibrid. Until then, Gwenin, as the guards of the Hero of Justice, please watch over them." Gwenin tells Jaeger, "We met like this as fate, so do you want to stay at my house? Save the money." Minivar happily replied that he was an excellent dwarf who knew how to treat his customers, adding that we were grateful, but was that okay? Jaeger replied, "No, we're okay, that's enough. I don't want to be a burden. I'm cautious about accepting kindness and favor." Minivar angrily shouted, "Why? Not in that cheap hotel anymore." Sool replied, "Well, Sig, that's fine, but still, be careful." Sool looked over at the cats and said, "I think the cats need a bathing place." Jaeger sighed and said, "Okay, then stay one day." Gwenin cheerfully said, "The right choice, let go of all hate." Jaeger looked at Sool, "You are injured and do you need me to carry you?" Sool was startled to reply. Minivar thought it was annoying, "I don't want to be self-deprecating at all. But cat hair is dirty." Using 100% of the brain, Sool happily replied, "Jaeger, no, it's not that serious." Minevar's face lit up, slamming his hands together, "Aha." Jaeger said to Gwenin, "Thanks for the invitation. I don't know if your house has a drainage system." "What does Gwenin say? We are dwarves. There are even bubbles in the hot water." There was a cry from behind Kya. Jaeger was heard shouting and Gwenin turned to look. Minivar was lying on the pavement with a fake expression on his face. "Damn, I'm gone. Where can I find a lowly servant who can carry me now?" Jaeger stared at her and said nothing. Jagger went on to talk to Gwenin. We want to wash the cats. Gwenin replied that you mean the fanged tiger sword. If you can bring gods into the house, it is my honor. It makes Minivar freeze. Minivar angrily stood up and nibbled on Jagger's head. Carry me this stupid cig. Jagger responds, you talk too much. Walk, and stop gnawing on my head. Jagger pointed to Minivar. Stop laughing, Sewell. Hurry up and help me. Jagger looked towards Gwenin. Gwenin, aren't you going? Gwenin replied, well, I'm here. Gwenin thinks if he's really the one wielding the cursed sword. This is like bringing a ticking time bomb into the house. Carr, the accusing hero, probably more dangerous than we think. Gwenin thought he hadn't mentioned this before, to use the cursed sword without going insane. Gwenin imagines the terrifying image, then the Jagger himself is a demon. After arriving at Gwenin's residence, Minerva and Sui felt extremely excited. Look at the air around Gwenin's house. Jagger said as he walked, I had heard Gwenin push the door before. He was the leader of the Stone Guild, so he was the leader of a Star Guild. Well. It's a very honorable position, but I'm just an ordinary dwarf. Looking at the scene in front of Jagger felt extremely surprised. Welcome to the territory of the Stone Society. At this time, Jagger was quite surprised by the scene in front of him. He said, all dwarves live underground. It is a tradition passed down from the time of our ancestors. Gwenin laughed. I don't know exactly how many tunnels like this exist. The two looked up at the door above. Gwenin ran excitedly towards the gate calling out, wife, you're back. Ara's father is back. At this time there was one little girl cleaning up the furniture in the house. It's finally back. Jagger asked with a smile. His girl was cute. Gwenin heard Jagger's, not a girl. She was my wife. Jagger was shocked by Gwenin's statement. He was quite curious. Gwenin was happy that this was the first time he had seen a female dwarf. From the human perspective she seemed quite young, but judging by the dwarf race, she was already an adult. Behind the dwarf wife was a shy little girl. She seemed shy and asked her mother, here it is. Aris. Gwenin ran towards his daughter raising his broad arms towards her. My cutest daughter in the world, little Aris, you are much older and give one hug. Dad, you shave and hug. This is my daughter Aris. Come on, very cute isn't it? Hello. Minerva greeted her with a smile. Nice to meet you, nice to meet you. Gwenin glanced upwards. Then something was read. Oh my, how disrespectful it is to let guests wait like that. Let us lead everyone to the bathroom. Gwenin opened the door to the room and said, everyone can use this room. Wow, a mirror, one true bed. Jagger smiled back, we'll use it carefully. I don't need to treat this as your home, relax. This person, so careless. But this is the capital of a country that, I guess, is okay. Jagger closed his eyes and said to Minerva, Minerva, don't get excited. Don't get attached to the bed too much. We're only here for one night. Use anything in the room to be careful. Sui cried out in a panic, sister. Minerva suddenly turned to look. I hadn't finished speaking yet, I was going to riot. Minerva shouted angrily, this damn servant. I can't take it anymore. Go ahead in my minion army, Diablo, Ishtar, deal with him. Hey, wait, yes. Jagger didn't have time to say he was attacked by two cats. Minerva laughed like a child exclaiming, see what, our victory. Jagger said helplessly, these guys are so big, what's more, what are those names? Sui standing by explained, Diablo and Mammon are the names of the devil, and Ishtar is the name of the goddess. If the house is going to name them, it should be at least one synchronous name. I name it with all my heart, Minerva replied with a smile. Can you give them another name? I know it's nice to me, but what about them? Sui's eyes dropped in response. She said it's okay, it's a lie, it's a bit sad. They're just shallow creatures, care what to do. Sister, be honest. Hearing this, Minerva's face turned red. They are not so weak. Sui and the sword-fanged tiger stared at the Minerva. Seeing this, Jagger sighed sadly. Jagger sighed a breath and said, okay, stop talking about this. Let's go to bed. Now in the Gwenin's room. Gwenin's wife said, it's quiet now. I guess humanity is a very noisy creature. Aras looked at his mother and smiled and asked, can you go and take a look? No. Gwenin folded the book. Darling, the demon detector in the house isn't broken. Gwenin's wife thought and replied. Something else came to light and sounded a warning when the devil appeared. Of course not. He corrected his speech before going on a mission. Gwenin's face sank in thought. Ah, you've corrected it. Does that mean the Jagger isn't a devil? Gwenin's wife wondered, why did you ask that? Darling, what happened in the human world? Gwenin replied. He witnessed. He thinks humanity is unreliable. Gunnanon's wife said, when the Carbon Kingdom was founded, we interacted with humans, as skilled races. From the perspective of the entire race it was a matter of necessity. But, honey, family is more important than work, right? From now on, let's be with Aris. You're right. Then the conversation stops here. Aris is late. You hurry back to sleep. Aris ran into the room and obediently replied, yes, father. After leaving the parents' room, Aris thought as she walked, I want to talk to the humans who were invited there, is there any way? She looked around. I'll bring them a late-night snack, and then let's talk. She went to the other luggage and searched. Not as much stuff as I thought. She saw a noise and turned to look. Then from behind the little girl appeared a black figure. She said, oh heaven, there are rats just running over the stars. Nothing, about the room. And she turned around to see someone's hands coming towards her. Aris screamed in fear, ah. Hearing the screams, Gwenon immediately ran outside repeatedly calling for Aris. Gwenon shouted his daughter's name, where's it? Heard one father, Gwenon turned to look. Then he saw Aris behind him. She looked at him with a smile. When Aris Gwenon felt relieved and hugged his daughter in his arms and asked, where have you gone? Because you hugged her quite tightly, Aris said, Dad? Gwenon looked at his daughter comfortingly, my golden Aris, I won't leave you alone. Suddenly Aris said, but father. Another voice not Aris's rang out, because he was busy keeping an eye on me, but he neglected his daughter. Hearing Jagger's voice, Gwenon looked up startled. Gwenon exclaimed, oh no, me, gone, I'm doing this for my family's safety. At this point the Gwenon calmed down the sweaty man. In front of the Gwenon someone was watching him. It turned out that person was Jagger. Gwenon said anxiously, it's been 1 week since that Aris disappeared. We searched all over Toryajan. Even though all my comrades, and you, joined in the search. But no clues have been found yet. As if she were hiding. Looking at Gwenon sadly drinking sorrowful wine. After taking a sip, he placed his wineglass firmly down on the table. Jagger sighed and told Gwenon to stop drinking. Gwenon said desperately, this situation had no choice, other than his housework and strength. Did he? Someone could solve this case. In Carbon apart from him, there was no one else who could, the ancient king, King Dimitri. He has overcome countless difficulties in this country, with the experience and wisdom accumulated over the past 3 years. Jagger said, Elf King, who ushered in the Carbon Kingdom era, he is really talented, unlike other warriors. Thank you for helping me find Aris, Jagger. It doesn't have to be, losing someone precious is sad for everyone. Gwenon looked up at Jagger and said, you must have noticed, now that I'm inviting you home for convenience. Jagger looked at everything around him calmly said, as soon as I entered the house I realized, I had seen through those security devices before. Gwenon closed his eyes and said, not ashamed of it. For I had suspected that he might be the wielder of the Sword of Darkness, or the Cursed Sword, or even a demon. That was the hero's suspicion of justice, the doubt he said. Don't get me wrong, I've been putting those doubts aside right now. I've been watching you since you stepped into the Carbon for evidence, but all you have, is that honest sword. It is the sword of Araneth Greenfield, aka Dragonslayer, which is said to be a cursed sword. Even the Kar Isnable hero at one point failed before. And the sword Fanged Tiger, it is said that they are kind of sacred creatures, never follow the demons. Jagger said, so my misunderstanding has cleared up. Gwenon replied casually, it's just a matter of whether you pose a threat to my family's safety, and I know that you've been searching for my daughter for the past week as well. After saying that, Gwenon handed Jagger an envelope. Taking it, Jagger asked in surprise, what is it? Hearing Jagger ask, Gwenon also said, authorize me to attend the meeting of the Carbon Supreme Council, as a representative, to send the sword Fanged Tiger back to Sigmare, since the gazette of his presence to the king not only helps in this case but also for other duties. Jagger said, apparently he had previously said he was just an ordinary dwarf. Gwenon replied with a smile, just a normal person, wishing his daughter safety. Signature Jagger, I seriously make a request. Please follow proper etiquette when standing in front of His Majesty. Jagger turned and walked away. Okay. At this time at the castle of Emperor Toryajan, the stump of the world tree. Jagger's men were slowly advancing. When we arrived, the door to the entrance was slowly opening. In front of Jagger 6 people were staring at him. One told Jagger's men that many children had been kidnapped last week, and among them was the daughter of the Stone Chief. The green-haired girl with a long tongue sticking out, saying that the patrol soldiers would only make the people more nervous. The white-haired girl stood beside her with a calm expression. Let's investigate with a small group first. These words were all recorded by one person. It was the person sitting in the center of the room, and after he had finished writing, he closed his notebook and spoke before dealing with this case. The Dmitri king folded the book and said, "Listen to the human hero who brought this trouble here. It turns out that this man is the king of Carbon, the ancient king of green copper Dmitri." Looking at that person, Jagger replied, "Yes. I request one investigation into the disappearance of Aris, daughter of Gwenin, leader of the Stone Order." "It's not Gwenin's problem." The Dmitri king seemed angry. "I ask about your own problem," the hero condemns. Jagger replied, "Yes, to send the fanged tiger home, so I suggested opening the entrance to the Sigmare. It has been in contact with humans." King Dmitri shook his head and said, disagreeing. Minerva whispered in Sui's ear. The other dwarf had said that this would be solved when he met the king of the dwarves, but he didn't seem to be very helpful. Hearing Minerva's words, asked in surprise, "Why, not only big cats, but Diablo, Mammon, Ishtar will be much happier to live in his hometown. Just one exception, everything will fall apart. Human girl, Sigmare is the sacred land that your ancestors protected with their own lives. It is not a place that can be opened for animals or other things." Jagger thought, because of animals or other things. So what do I do? Jagger moves forward and faces the Dmitri king. Dmitri called out to Jagger, speaking again. Jagger replied, "I know nothing of future events that may or may not happen. Even if he were king of this place, he had no right to prevent someone from returning to their homeland, if it were not." As soon as he finished his sentence, his men suddenly looked towards Jagger. The guards on Emperor Dimitri's side darkened their faces. Jagger said sternly, "Isn't the sacred Carbon kingdom still maintaining slavery?" Hearing this, the emperor stared angrily at Jagger. The Dmitri king pointed to Jagger, the hero accused, "You have already spoken the taboo of this Carbon kingdom. I will leave the processing to you." Humankind. How insolent. Jagger glanced up at the giant. A tall, muscular minion swung his sword up and down with tremendous force. However, he quickly escaped under everyone's surprise. Sword slashed down. The other was slashed with a long line in his eyes, frantically counter-attacking. The two rushed into each other. Suddenly the blonde called out for them to stop. The other stopped the battle, respectfully bowing to the princess. He was delighted to think he wouldn't have a chance to meet the savior of his life. She introduced herself as Nyas Greenfield, then also bowed to his father. He turned to ask his beloved daughter if there was anything that made her uncomfortable. She replied that no, and if she could ask her father, he agreed. She asked, first, that what Sig said wasn't entirely wrong. Shabel just wanted to return to his hometown. If he was worried, he could hear more from her. Currently, there are cases of kidnapping and disappearances occurring in their Toryajan. Their methods of abduction are so sophisticated that it is difficult to trace them. And Sig is a hero who has solved difficult tasks within the human sphere, so he might consider giving it to him. We'll reward him if he solves the task. He replied that he was not sure and told the princess to leave the task to him. She smiled. She whispered to him that she was returning the favor. He thanked her and was a little surprised because he thought she was a high-ranking member of Carbon but didn't expect her to be a princess. She apologizes to him for hiding his identity, but he also knows how humanity treats love. In fact, the world is quite harsh for the goblin princess. But one day Carbon's people will also live in harmony with humanity because thanks to people like him. He sheepishly said she wasn't sure. She went on now that whatever her father's opinion she would be responsible for. Trying to declare herself Princess Nyas Greenfield, from now on she will ensure the actions and safety of the signature Jaeger hero in the land of Carbon. One voiced whether the princess was giving people too many favors. The princess replied that it was natural for the man who gave his life to save her, and look at the sword he held. It is the red dragon sword. This is Araneth's control. A person who possesses that sword should not be treated superficially. Suddenly everyone stood close together and looked at him in awe. The princess apologetically said that when Araneth's name came, everyone would react the same. She asked him if he was embarrassed. He replied a little. She went on to say that to humans Araneth is a dragon-slaying warrior, but to humans she is not just fins. From afar dragons invaded Carbon in pursuit of golden wood, a noble local wood. Araneth was the savior who fought dozens of dragons with her powers. All the inhabitants of Carbon gradually grew to worship her name. Eventually the golden wood was gradually depleted, but Archith's legacy has been handed down to this day. Sigmare's hidden to protect everything here, created by Araneth's will. She said if he helped her wipe out the criminal organization that threatened Carbon, she could ask her father to open the Sigmare seal. He immediately said he was here to ask her to solve his case. Not this one, she said, but he had already solved a murder case that turned the world upside down. At that time she witnessed the scene when she secretly visited Emilia. At that time everyone came together to shout the name of the hero who wiped out the corruption of the entire country after the murder. Signature Jagger, an expert in understanding humanity, just as he revolutionized and transformed Emilia, Carbon, also needed his power. He thought for a long time. Then said if the benefits were doubled he would accept. She thanked him gladly. Girl who didn't expect these things made Sig helpless and told Seo that the princess was quite good. Seo agreed and thought if she could hold Sig's hand like the princess. The princess was still telling him not to worry about convincing her father after he was done. If that was her suggestion, her father would reward it. He was concerned to tell her not to have too high expectations because he wasn't a professional investigator. But she trusted him completely. He is the only one who can protect the peace of this place. At Carbon Studio, the Florida leader of the Harpy clan began to introduce the state of the investigation. The name of this organization is the military. They are now the mastermind of many kidnappings in Carbon. They consist of a central command and the rest is organized in the form of a human network. Information confirmed that they primarily carried out kidnapping and trafficking in low-level organizations. She shyly said it was all she had gathered a little bit. He asked if this was all he needed to know about the disappearances and kidnappings that had taken place over the past few years, where the investigation had gone so far. She replied that she must have only had some surface information and already had information about most of the lower-level members. He angrily felt that the information was meaningless only until he could get hold of the general command could the network stop appearing. He thought that the situation was extremely bad, worse than he thought. Florida thinks they're in a country that's been closed for hundreds of years, so it's too neglectful of obsolete problems, so it can't avoid social evils appearing. He thought they must have exhausted themselves from chasing the traffickers. He said there would still be an effective way to stop those bastards though. Using a decoy. At a tavern, a bald man with a bored expression was sitting drinking. Then a long dark-haired man appeared to show his will, and the man agreed. The boy sat down to talk to the man who said he looked smaller than rumored. Marc Blentier's assassin. He said that when you have exhausted your determination, your body will be crippled. He came here when he has lost all his subordinates, honor and everything. The boy went on to agree with most people when he was empty-handed. He then offered whether he wanted to cooperate with us. At the place of duty. The boy showed him the target of the little girl with cat ears over there. His task was to bring that girl back. He looked and said it didn't look that hard. The boy reminded her to be careful because the leader liked this prey very much, so he must not let her get hurt. He asked if the girl was special. He replied of course so, non-human creatures all sell at quite high prices. If such a child existed, it must have been noticed before, but suddenly it appeared he did not know the reason. After all, he believed he wouldn't let the girl get hurt. He approached the girl who knocked her down. Then stuffed her into a sack. The guy complimented him on his perfect hand, even if it was broken. He continues to wear the goods this time so their leader will personally select and this will be a good opportunity Mark to make a good impression. Mark was a little surprised. He went on to say that someone like him should not be so overwhelmed and from now on he will witness many interesting things. The boy led him to a shelter in an abandoned cave, but that wasn't all. He questioned the non-human creatures he answered. At first he thought they liked his fellow humans very much or maybe pretend, but then they were just like humans. When you are hungry, the love of fellow human beings or comrades comes first. As your leader used to say in the end, money comes first. At the chieftain's place. He said Marc Blentier was an invaluable talent in their population. It's rare to find a high-quality item like the one Mark caught this time. Mark thought this was the leader of the gang. He went on to say let's take a look at the item Mark caught this time. He was immediately excited, his face was wide red, his face was pink, if it was too much to sell, or he kept her to himself. He told her if I could keep you as a pet in his house, she replied softly please. He immediately discovered that this was not a cat, but just a normal person with cat ears, and soon he was sneaked with a stick in the back. The boy immediately ran to call the soldiers. However, suddenly a layer of ice covered the whole place and obstructed his path. He shouted asking who the other man was. He said you still don't realize who I am, I'm the condemning hero. The boy and the chieftain were tied up. He said heaven we had been fooled by it spectacularly. He glanced at him asking what he was saying, now he should keep his mouth shut. He complimented the girl acting as a very good decoy acting well. The girl next to her also complimented it on her suiting her very well, sister. The angry girl said it was the one who asked me to do what she was now teasing. The other girl turned to ask Mr. Sig why he was disguising himself as Mark. He replied that since he was bald it would be much easier to disguise. He looked around and thought there wasn't much to collect. Then continued to interrogate the two of them to tell the location of the kidnappers and the teams deployed. You must tell them all not to leave anything behind. He said you had to untie him first before he could speak. You warned him that if he played tricks you would send him off. He said he finally realized who he was. It was Signature Jagger, the hero who finished off the arson Parthenon. But he would not speak out with those threats. He knew his authority and demanded a fair trial first. Once he opened his mouth the country would. Before he could finish he was struck in the face and grabbed him by the collar and forced him to speak. He was terrified to go down to the basement to find a secret door deep in the warehouse, with 20 mercenaries and one of their leaders and the key hanging from his belt. He thanked him and released him and said he would be right back. If anything happened he would report it immediately. The long-haired blue girl asked if it wasn't for the red dragon sword, how could he do it? The long dark-haired girl smiled and said that she could finally use this body. She had been waiting for this day for a long time. But he told her to stay here, empty-handed was enough. In the basement cries for help for release. A man standing guard shouted silently at the annoyance. A frightened little girl called her parents constantly. Then he shouted and raised his sword and threatened to strike. Suddenly a voice asked her if she was okay. She looked up and thought it was a star elf. The voice went on to say that although she was small and short, the dwarves were a race of warriors. Patience is a virtue of the warrior, so dwarves can do it too. The little girl cheered immediately, saying thank you to the elf. The other guy happily told his accomplices if he saw the mortar earlier when he slipped into the cage did not look as happy as he was in the zoo. The accomplice replied that it was not over. The animals here could talk. By the way, it was time to change shifts and no one had arrived. As soon as he finished speaking, there was a dangerous shout and then there was an intruder. The guy reacted angrily saying who that person was, the dumb harpy or the goblin hunt. The guy who had just announced that an intruder replied was a human and he was alone. He snapped to lead the way and would deal with the intruder in a heartbeat. He appeared to break the blue-haired man's neck and said he didn't look for me. He greeted him for a long time. It was a surprise that he was alive. He was furious when he saw him appear reproachful because of him and the so-called heroes of justice that he had lost everything, lost all his subordinates, the reputation of everything and everything ended here. He roared saying I am Turin, I will return it today to my subordinates. Make a request if you have the guts to duel with him. He rushed to throw a punch but he dodged. Pull out their swords and deal with them all then release the beastmen they captured. The little girl who had just run to the hero excitedly. He took the key and was opening the door for her when a voice came. There were intruders, some of them had already been arrested. Then a crowd of people came running to arrest him. The goblin just now rushed to stop it and said, "Behold, they will lend you power." He asked what his name was, to which he replied that his name was Halcyon. Sai smiled and said, "Okay, Halcyon, let's move a little together."